ad hominem about the ministers who made decisions. I think we need to make that decision later, as it were. But she's right. It has diminished the standing of our Prime Minister, and I regret that, because although we have opposition, I want this government to succeed. Yeah. It's in the national interest of and actually it's doing the opposite of that. So the ambassador's conduct, both prior to appointment and during, must reflect the highest standards of integrity. That is fundamental, and that's true for any ambassador. I give way to my honourable.
First of all, can I commend the right honourable gentleman for bringing this forward. This debate unites, I believe, this House and the purpose of it. As clear as and within the rules, Mr. Speaker, that MPs are accountable for their staff and their conduct, and that there will be repercussions for that. Does the right honourable member agree as well that the Prime Minister is also accountable for his appointment of the UK ambassador to the United States of America, and the same rules should apply?
He's absolutely right, and when we look at the mechanisms, as I hope we will in the course of this debate, when we look at the mechanisms engaged, we'll see, I hope, why he made the wrong decision, because there's no doubt in my mind that he did make the wrong decision. Now, if I can turn to of course I give way. Yeah.
I thank the right honourable gentleman for giving way. He talks about decisions by the Prime Minister. He talks about the duty on members of this place and members of the other place to have the appropriate conduct. Does it surprise him, as it surprises me, that we have a situation where the honourable member for York Central has been unfairly suspended from the Labour whip, along with others, for opposing disability benefit cuts? The Mother of the House remains suspended from the Labour Party, yet Lord Mandelson retains the Labour whip in the House of Lords. Aren't all of those things decisions by the Prime Minister? And don't people outside here, including Labour members, think that's completely unfair?
I understand all too well the point the honourable gentleman is making. Many have made it in the newspapers, generally not anonymously, the double standard, as it were, that applies to the top of the Labour Party, to Labour royalty, if you like, as opposed to other people who have been punished for actually doing their jobs, for representing their people, and so on. So no, he's got a point there. He's got a point there. But if all right, I'll then make some progress.
I thank the member for giving way. Does he not think it's slightly odd that prior to the appointment of Lord Mandelson there was obviously not sufficient due diligence done, and on the day before he was dismissed apparently there were a lot of emails available to the Prime Minister which he either wasn't given or didn't read, and so we find this odd situation where the British ambassador to the USA has to be dismissed in full glare of international publicity because of what his behaviour had been in the past, which was apparently very well known to a very large number of people who should not have supported his appointment in the first place.
Well, the right honourable gentleman is exactly right. And we will come to a number of circumstances where information was available which should have been acted upon and wasn't. And this was not as hard as some may try to portray. After all, the appointment did not come as a surprise. I mean, Lord Mandelson himself was clearly campaigning to become the ambassador after he failed to win the Chancellorship of Oxford University. I suspect, I think somebody told me that he was actually campaigning whilst he was trying to campaign. So he was after two jobs, not one. So it was clear early that he was going to attempt to do this, and there was widespread discussion at the time about his suitability for the role, and therefore there was plenty of time for a preliminary investigative or vetting process. There was and is vast amounts of data in the public domain.
Yep.
Most of what I'm going to speak of today is public domain material. I'll explain when it's not, but most of it is. And what would that vetting process be looking for? traditionally, and I speak, and a number of us on these benches, and most benches I imagine, have been through these vetting processes ourselves. What would they look for? Traditionally, they'd review the history and personality of the candidate, assessing risks. The risk of the candidate being susceptible to undue influence. Or in the extreme example, blackmail. I mean, the Russians and the Chinese collect compromat all the time. Risks of the candidate abusing or misusing the role. Risks of the candidate doing something that will cause reputational damage. Or, and some on the Labour front bench may find this difficult, rather old-fashioned perhaps, risks the candidate is too morally flawed to be given a major role in any place, which is where we may arrive in a moment. That they fail a simple ethical test. An ethical test, and I'm afraid I am old-fashioned. I view ethical tests as absolute. They're not ones you can trade off against some benefit or other. Well, in the history I'm about to detail, we see a Peter Mandelson who is easily dazzled by wealth and glamour, and who is willing to use his public position to pursue those things for himself. This was visible very early in his career, even to his friends. So when in 1998 he was sacked as a Trade and Industry Secretary for failing to declare an interest-free loan, a pretty enormous interest-free loan he had received from Jeffrey Robinson, at that time, Mr. Robinson's businesses were being investigated by Mandelson's department. So there's a clear clash of interest, and he didn't even declare the loan. That was the first time we saw so publicly the abiding flaws in Lord Mandelson's character, which frankly would normally disqualify any normal person from a job this important. But even his friends saw this. This flaw was described plainly by one of his friends back then as, and I quote, "Peter was living beyond his means, pretending to be something he's not, and therefore he was beholden to people." And the important bit of that is that last phrase. He was beholden to people. And this is a characteristic that was displayed time and again as he sought to use his position to curry favour with very wealthy and very powerful people who are either current or future benefactors. Now this was repeated in 2001 when Lord Mandelson again was sacked after attempting to broker a British passport for Mr. Hinduja, a wealthy donor to the Millennium Dome project of which he was involved. And Mandelson attempted to influence the Home Office to give Mr. Hinduja a passport when Mr. Hinduja and his brother were under investigation in the Bofors weapons contract scandal. So again, a dubious reason. It was about that time, just as an aside, that his association with Epstein starts, and the infamous birthday book entries date from there.
On that point,
yes,
I thank Max Wilkinson. I thank the right honourable member for giving way. Does he share my concern that if the Prime Minister is to be discussing this issue with President Trump later in the week, and the Prime Minister has to have influence over President Trump for very good reasons, that if the issue of Lord Mandelson's relationship with Jeffrey Epstein comes up, because President Trump is also in that birthday book, we understand, with the very infamous poem, what's the Prime Minister going to say?
Well, I'm very glad to say I'm not the Prime Minister's speechwriter.
There's a vacancy. There's a vacancy. There's a vacancy. He just resigned.
And all I can say is I hope it doesn't come up, because it will be undoubtedly embarrassing and diplomatically problematic for him. Now, however, we get to about 2004, and astonishingly, after being sacked twice for misdemeanours, in 2004 he's appointed by Tony Blair to be the European Trade Commissioner. He gets a third chance, as it were, at this. And as Trade Commissioner, he was criticised on numerous occasions for accepting lavish hospitality from companies whose commercial interests he was in the process of ruling on. Whether it's Microsoft or an Italian shoe producer or whatever, and this lavish hospitality for some reason often involves free luxury cruises. But he saw nothing wrong with this apparent compromising behaviour. He saw nothing wrong with it. And of course, in that category, and rather at the top of that category, was his association with the Russian oligarch and gangster capitalist Oleg Deripaska. Now, let's be clear who we're talking about here. Most colleagues, I'm sure, wouldn't really know much about him. So, Mr. Deripaska was the winner of the battle for control of Russian aluminium, the Russian aluminium industry, a battle in which roughly 100 people were murdered. In court reports, Interpol documents, and in American government publications, Deripaska has faced serious allegations of murder, bribery, extortion, and involvement in organised crime. This is a truly bad man. I wouldn't take
And for the case he's making, I just wonder, while he deals with the case of the influence of Russian oligarchs in British politics, whether he would opine on the suitability of British political parties accepting donations from Russians and the impact that that might have on their policies and their positions.
So, David, had he been here before the last election, he would have sat in his chamber, I hope, and heard me opine on all those subjects and raise laws or prospective laws to deal with those oligarchs. Laws that, sadly, this government has failed to carry through on. So that's the backdrop. And in 2006, Mr. Deripaska's visa was revoked by the Americans. So Mandelson had no excuse for not knowing about this. And yet, as European Trade Commissioner, he saw fit to accept hospitality from Deripaska on multiple occasions over several years, including visiting him in Moscow, being flown by Deripaska's private jet to stay at his dacha in Siberia, and on his private yacht in the Mediterranean, all while considering whether to give Russian aluminium access to the European market. Now, Deripaska's activities were known to the British security services, and briefings were available to Mr. Mandelson, Lord Mandelson, I think Mr. as he was then. And so again, there is no excuse. He did this in full knowledge of who he was dealing with. Now, it was in this position that Mandelson promoted and signed off concessions to Russian aluminium companies that ultimately benefited Mr. Deripaska, or his companies, to the tune of $200 million a year. $200 million a year. And a company that was due, it didn't actually happen, but it was due to be IPO'd, it was due to be floated shortly thereafter. And a $200 million change in profits tends to mean a multi-billion dollar change in value into the pocket of Mr. Deripaska. And of course, we should all know, Deripaska's a nominee of Putin. So you can assume that a large chunk of that went to Putin as well.
And it's sanctioned.
Now, in 2008, Mandelson was very controversially raised by Gordon Brown to the peerage and appointed as business secretary. And his contact with Epstein did not end. As Epstein was pleading guilty to child sex offences, Mandelson emailed him. I think the world of you, and I feel hopeless and furious about what's happened. Your friends stay with you and love you. So little remorse there, shall we say, and little pity for the victims. Now, after he left office in 2010, when Labour lost that election, Lord Mandelson founded a lobbying firm, Global Counsel. Now, he controversially did not name his clients. Now, in the House of Lords have got rather slack rules on this, and so somebody can create a company and then they just declare that they get however much money from the company and don't declare who the customers really are. Now, I don't have documentary records on this, so I'm not going to name the companies we're talking about, but there are Russian companies, extremely dubious Russian companies. There are Chinese companies, and I'm looking down at my right honourable friend in front of me, the member for Chingford, who, or Epping, or whatever it is now, I've lost track of them. He would recognise a number of them because he's campaigned on a number of them. I'll leave it as loose as that. But in the context of his appointment to Washington, bear in mind this is all a judgment being made about being the ambassador in Washington, it's his close association with the organs of the Chinese state that would have raised most red flags, if the House will forgive the pun. The Interparliamentary Alliance on China presented a dossier to US senators that provoked enough concern that they passed it to the FBI. this may have been a reason, and here I am surmising, this may have been the reason for the purported concerns on whether the Trump administration would allow Mandelson's accreditation back in January. Of course I give way. Yeah.
I thank you for giving way on that point and appreciate some of the points he was making. Thank you. I would just note that one of the Conservative candidates at the last general election running in Milton Keynes worked for Global Council, and it's interesting that the Conservative Party has such complaints about an organisation when they were willing to support a candidate who worked for the organisation.
Grow up.
Well, exactly.
Risible.
Let me just. I'm going to be very gentle. Let me just say this: we're talking about a very serious issue here, where the national interest is engaged, and we're talking about somebody who, in my view, has used public position to his own advantage and to the disadvantage of the state. That is not true of some candidate working in a junior role for a company. It is true for the man who created that company and who used it to promote his own interest. Now, I'll come back to the Interparliamentary Alliance to China, because from my point of view, and this is it's personal rather than public. This, from my point of view, even more worrying were the attitudes struck by Mandelson in February 2021, when he told Chinese Premier Li Keqiang that the critics of Beijing's human rights record would be proved wrong during a lobbying meeting, of course, on behalf of his rich clients. And then this astonishing statement was followed later that year, when Mandelson was the only Labour peer in 2021 to vote against the three-line whip against the genocide amendment, which would have meant the country had to reconsider any trade deal with a country found by the High Court to be committing genocide. Most specifically, China was in the crosshairs on this. So frankly, it would appear that Lord Mandelson has subcontracted his conscience for money. Of course I can.
He mentioned the Interparliamentary Alliance on China. Can I just explain, in case House thinks this is a Conservative organisation? It has members of Parliament from all parties in this House. It has 53 countries involved in it, with both co-chairs on the left and on the right. It is wholly above party politics, but all about the threat from China.
So, David, he's exactly right, and the senators that these documents were sent to are very responsible senators, and they would not frivolously pass on those documents to the FBI. And the FBI would not frivolously accept them and investigate them. Now,
my right honourable friend allow me?
Yes, of course.
I'm very
Sir Julian Lewis.
My right honourable friend. Does he recall that on 21st of November last, the Prime Minister was challenged to rule out appointing Lord Mandelson as Ambassador to the United States on the grounds that he had said that Ukraine would have to give up all the land that Russia had occupied, and that it must give up any hope of ever joining NATO in return for some unspecified security guarantees. The Prime Minister said he would not be tempted to comment on that possibility of him being appointed ambassador, and as he said it, he had a very noticeable little smirk on his face. Does my right honourable friend agree that the Prime Minister isn't smirking about this matter anymore?
I'll say to my right honourable friend that the Prime Minister gave what was clearly, what can I say, a lawyer's answer to that question, which is, as we all know, is not a proper answer at all. Now, Number 10 was well aware that Mandelson had continued his relationship with Epstein after he was convicted as a paedophile. How the Prime Minister could possibly have thought it was wise to appoint a man who was on record consorting with alleged murderers and convicted paedophiles to a position of privilege and power, to me, is utterly unfathomable. It's long...
He has rightly pointed out his murky attitude towards money. But does it not also shine a terrible light on his attitude towards women? Yeah. And that by contrast, this doesn't look good for the government?
So David, I agree, she's right. I mean, his continued support of Epstein shows an attitude which I find completely reprehensible in exactly that respect, because Epstein's victims were women. Young women, girls, children. So, yes, I do agree with that. Now, So it's long been clear he was not suitable to be our ambassador. So the question is, what changed last week? The Bloomberg emails revealing further details of the extent of Epstein's relationship with Mandelson, and the birthday book where Mandelson referred to Epstein as his best pal, were with Mandelson by Monday evening, and with the Foreign Office by overnight or by Tuesday morning at the latest. The Prime Minister is said to have known of the investigation by Tuesday afternoon, but not of the content of the emails. Why, when our most important diplomat, in our most important international relationship, is under question, under investigation, would the Prime Minister not want to know the details of the investigation immediately? We understand the Prime Minister's Chief of Staff, Morgan McSweeney, was talking to Mandelson all day on Tuesday. So what was Mandelson saying to McSweeney? And what was this? And was this passed to the Prime Minister? One of the things I would ask the Minister later on is, can he give the House an undertaking we can have a record of that conversation? Because I think we need to know that. Mandelson gave a media interview on Wednesday morning, hours before PMQs, admitting that more embarrassing revelations would come out. More embarrassing revelations. Mandelson's past scandals, his links to Epstein, were crystal clear by the time the Prime Minister rose to speak in PMQs on last Wednesday.
Would he give way on that point?
I don't. Yeah.
I'm grateful for the member giving way. And is he aware of James Matthews, who's the Sky News reporter, who on the 27th of May even cornered Mr Mandelson to ask him specifically about staying in a flat? Mandelson did not deny it. He simply said, "I regret having any connection with him." These are the kind of questions that should have been asked and were being asked by the member for Melton and many others in this House back in May of this year about the suitability of the ambassador. Does he agree that the Prime Minister should have looked into this further at that point?
Yeah, exactly. In fact, earlier than that point, and I'll come back to that when I talk very briefly about the vetting process. But what precisely did the Prime Minister learn from reading the Bloomberg emails that were not already known about Lord Mandelson from public information and vetting done before the appointment? Each day that goes by, we not only see more shocking revelations about Mandelson's misconduct, his links to Jeffrey Epstein and the failures of both the vetting process and the political judgment of those at the top of government. And I will say to the honourable member who intervened on me earlier, not just the political judgment, but their moral standards and the equity of the way they apply those moral standards across the board. Which brings us to the question, what happened to the vetting process? Most of what I have described was in the public domain. It doesn't take James Bond. Google could do this. That which was not in the public domain was in the official records or known to the intelligence agencies. In other words, all available to the government. And there was, we know, the propriety and ethics two-page briefing, which should have flagged concerns, but which merely triggered an unpenetrating email inquiry. That goes straight to the point my honourable friend just raised, which is, where were the questions? And you don't just send a 3-line email and forget about it. You pursue the question. You cross-question the person who's under suspicion. I will give way.
I'm grateful for my right honourable friend giving way. He will know the Intelligence and Security Committee of this Parliament. Its members are subject to extreme deep vetting, but there's also a double check, and that is this Parliament has to give agreement for the appointments to that committee once nominated by the Prime Minister. Does not the Mandelson case strengthen the argument for pre-confirmation hearings by the relevant parliamentary committees of this House in order that candidates can be cross-questioned? At the moment, there are only around 1,000 regulated public appointments that the Cabinet Office advises on for this House ahead of being appointed. None of them include a Foreign or Commonwealth Development Office appointment. Is it not now time to have that change, whether they are political appointments or senior civil servants?
Well, I think he makes a very good point. I certainly think that would be the right way to go for political appointments. I think it would probably be the right way to go for the top dozen of the embassies. I wouldn't be worrying about all of them, without being rude to. I won't pick a country, but because that would just be meaningless. But the top dozen, I think, is well worthwhile doing. But I give way.
I thank the honourable member for giving way. He mentioned before the propriety and ethics team within the Cabinet Office produced a report that was presumably handed to the Prime Minister and was certainly done so prior to the announcement. I wonder if he agrees with me that the Minister must tell us whether or not the Prime Minister read that report, whether it contained anything that Parliament should have been aware of before he made that appointment.
Well, he makes a good point. So I'll turn to it in a moment, but he's right, and I will reiterate the point. Because in addition to what my honourable friend said, there should have been a fully developed vetting process, and it appears not to have happened. Normally speaking, there's a vetting unit in the Foreign Office, there's a vetting unit in the Cabinet Office. One of them should have been engaged on this. And there have been claims that the developed vetting happens after the appointment. No, it doesn't. For existing ambassadors who are on a 5-year vetting cycle, sure. For ambassadors or officers who are being read into a new class of material, sure. But for this, an outsider coming into the most sensitive job in government, certainly not.
Well, my right honourable friend to play.
I'm being frowned at by the Speaker for taking so much time. I'll give way the last time.
Thank you. My right honourable friend is very generous.
At the weekend, the Business Secretary appeared to say the government believed it was worth the risk at appointing Lord Mandelson from the outset. As I hear that, what the Business Secretary was saying, that it was worth the risk of the positive qualities that Lord Mandelson had, as they see it, worth the risk that he might be more involved with a convicted paedophile than they thought from the outset. If that's the risk the government were judging him by, isn't that shameful?
I've already said that my view is ethical risks, ethical standards are absolute, so there should not be a trade-off. But let's take this as maybe a practical decision for a second, and take Mandelson his own measure of himself. He loves being called the Dark Lord and all the rest of it. He preens himself on being a master of the dark arts, spin, message management, political tactics, manipulation of the truth, a repertoire of things that most people would not be proud of. Now, if the government thinks that these actually make up for, in some way, in a skill, make up for his sins, well, no. I mean, firstly, he's not as good as being cracked up to be, frankly, and he's being measured, remember this, against Karen Pierce, the officer in place, probably the best ambassador, certainly the most revered. And after her, Tim Barrow, who was our ambassador to the European Union during Brexit, and was the NSA, was the National Security Advisor, knows all these things to the tips of his fingers. That better than them? Pull the other one. Right. So, I'm coming to the end, Mr. Speaker, before you frown anymore. Number 10 claims Mandelson was economical with the truth. Mandelson claims he told the whole truth. Both statements cannot be true. So the questions I pose to the Minister are, will the government rule out Mandelson being brought back into government? Number 10 refused to rule him out, giving him another job earlier this week, or last week. If Mandelson withheld information during the vetting process, is he going to lose the Labour whip? I'm looking at Mr. Bergen when I say that. Is he going to have to resign from the House of Lords? Will Lord Mandelson be receiving compensation, as some reports to the media suggest he'll be paid £100,000 of taxpayers' money?
What?
Yeah. Will the Prime Minister, his Chief of Staff, his Cabinet Secretary and the Permanent Secretary of the Foreign Office appear before the select committees of the House to give evidence? And will the Minister provide the House with the documents required to answer our questions as to who knew what and when? That is the Propriety and Ethics Team report, the Development Vetting report if it exists. And I say this to the Minister. There are many quotes in the newspapers from his own party about their horror regarding his decisions and processes. No, I really am coming to an end. I may quote just one of them. This is a long-standing senior Labour member, but he's anonymous. I care that this culture of turning a blind eye to the horrendous behaviour is endemic at the top of society. And I agree with him. So when individuals with these associations are ushered back to the heart of government, are we right to ask what standards now govern appointments to public life? Impunity is not a right. Impropriety is not a technicality. And survivors of crime should not have to do the heavy lifting of holding the powerful to account. Now, I mentioned at the beginning, Mr. Speaker, a bill is being put to the House later today, well, it's been put to the House already, imposing a duty of candour on public authorities and officials. My last and single question to the Minister is, will his government now live up to the words in that bill?
Just to say, can I just gently say, as a senior member, obviously he's taken the time he felt required, it's long farther than 15 minutes, just to say, when we are naming other members, it should be by constituency, not by name. Right. Now then, the question is, as on the order paper, I now call Dame Emily Thornberry, Chair of the Committee.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. My committee first asked for the opportunity to question Lord Mandelson at the end of last year, when rumours first surfaced of his appointment as Ambassador to the United States, and we continued to ask after his appointment was confirmed. Indeed, the Minister may remember our exchange on the 14th of January in this chamber, when I asked him to allow Lord Mandelson the time to come before my committee before he leaves for the United States, to allow my colleagues to hear directly why the Prime Minister has appointed him. These requests were made more often and privately after that, and in the 8 months since, and they have been turned down. I understand that we've had a little bit of Chinese whispers going on, because I understand that it's claimed that the Foreign Office has been telling journalists that we had the opportunity to meet and question Lord Mandelson when we were in Washington. Now, obviously, there's been a break in that chain, because the reality is, of course, that we had a 15-minute interaction over breakfast while receiving a formal briefing from the diplomatic staff about other meetings that we were having that day. Obviously quite materially different to the type of formal evidence session required to conduct meaningful scrutiny. Mr. Speaker, but I do want to make it clear that we have not sought to question Lord Mandelson out of a desire to frustrate the government or its diplomatic agenda. In fact, quite the opposite. It's our responsibility to scrutinise the Foreign Office to prevent exactly the sort of mistake from damaging Britain's reputation on the international stage. We want to make the Foreign Office the best that it can be, and in so many ways it is doing an absolutely excellent job, and it is fantastic to see the way in which Britain's reputation has been so enhanced. However, mistakes can be made, and obviously have been made, because while the shocking revelations of the last week were not in the public domain in December, Lord Mandelson's relationship with Jeffrey Epstein was very widely known. And had my committee had the opportunity to question Lord Mandelson, I'm confident that our members would have raised a range of questions, but these questions as well, just as journalists, particularly those at the Financial Times, have tried to do. Now, it's quite possible that in answer to those questions, we may have provoked evasive answers, or possibly not true answers, or maybe even the same sort of response that was met by the journalists, particularly those from the Financial Times. But it would have all been in the public sphere. It would have been on the record. Lord Mandelson would have had the opportunity to tell the truth before the House. Mr. Speaker, having failed to convince the government to permit us to question Lord Mandelson, I wrote to the Foreign Secretary on Friday, posing a number of questions about the apparent failures in due diligence and vetting processes conducted before and after the announcement of Lord Mandelson's appointment. And these questions included: what concerns were raised by any agencies undertaking security clearance ahead of Lord Mandelson's appointment? What was a decision taken to dismiss any such security concerns? If so, was such a decision taken by the FCDO or Number 10? Was any decision taken to suspend or alter the usual vetting requirements or the usual time frame for vetting procedures? And may I thank the Foreign Secretary for her prompt response to that letter, which I received this morning. And in her reply, she informs me that the initial due diligence process was carried out by the Cabinet Office Propriety and Ethics team before the announcement of Lord Mandelson's appointment, as has been widely reported. She assures me that the Foreign Office did not contribute to this process. nor were any issues raised by the FCDO as a result of the... I think this is quite important, and I'd like to have the opportunity to inform the House of this with clarity so that we all know where we stand, because I do believe that this contribution to the debate is an important one. It's not a party political one. It is just trying to make sure that we learn from what we've heard. So she assures me that the Foreign Office did not contribute to this process, nor were any issues raised by the FCDO as a result of this Cabinet Office process. So the question is this: did the Cabinet Office miss the glaring red flag of Lord Mandelson's relationship with Epstein, or did it fail to pass those concerns on, and if so, why?
Exactly.
The Foreign Office... Genuinely, guys, just give me a chance to put this before you. The Foreign Secretary's letter states that I genuinely hope that the honourable gentleman will give me an opportunity to put this before the House. And I apologise for speaking to them as guys. The Foreign Secretary's letter...
Keep going, Emily.
The Foreign Secretary's letter states that Cabinet Office due diligence was followed by the usual developed vetting, or DV process, carried out by National Security Vetting on behalf of the FCDO after the announcement of Lord Mandelson's appointment. This was, the Foreign Secretary says, conducted to the usual standard set of developed vetting. Now, career civil servants are regularly subject to such tests, and many have stories of their appointments being delayed or even prohibited because they've studied abroad, because they've married an Iranian, or because they were simply born in Belfast. So the question is this: does having significant information in the public domain about your relationship with an internationally prolific child sex offender not raise more red flags than simply being born in Belfast? Is a civil servant a greater risk to this country because they are married to somebody who was born in the Middle East, or because they were close friends with Jeffrey Epstein? Did the Foreign Office vetting process miss a glaring national security and reputational risk, or was it told to overlook it? Mr. Speaker, my committee's duty is to scrutinise the Foreign Office to make it the best that it can be. Neither the Foreign Office nor the Cabinet Office has shown itself to be the best it can be in the process surrounding this appointment. If I'll get to the end of this paragraph, and then of course I will give way. That is why my committee asked yesterday for the Foreign Office Permanent Under-Secretary and the Cabinet Office Head of Propriety and Ethics to appear before us and to explain what went wrong. We have been told that no one is available before the recess, and we will continue to push for prompt and public answers. I give way to the Honourable Gentleman.
To the Right Honourable Lady for giving way. She speaks powerfully. Does she think if her committee had been allowed to interview Lord Mandelson, that they would have come up with a recommendation not to approve the appointment? And in such a situation, does she think her recommendation would have been listened to?
I think this is slightly more subtle than that. I think the point is this, is that if Lord Mandelson had appeared before the committee, he would have faced a range of questions which would have highlighted issues that needed to be considered properly and couldn't, in the rush to appoint him, perhaps have been overlooked in the way that it would seem to have been. It's to put a brake on it, and we would not, as a committee, have the power to say the government can't appoint, but we would shed light on the nature of the appointment and be able, through our questions, to be able to examine whether or not it was the wisest thing to do. I give way to the Honourable Gentleman.
Does the Honourable Lady agree with me that if we are to salvage anything positive from this whole sorry episode at all, then it has to be that in the future Parliament is put at the role of this process and through the select committees? And does not her experience illustrate that the question of who is in charge of that has to remain with the select committee and not with the executive?
Dame Emily.
I don't quite put it like that. I think that the executive does in the end make the decision. They are the executive. But I think that we should, as a select committee, have a role in this, particularly when it comes to political appointments. It did happen before when there were political appointments. The Right Honourable Gentleman may remember to the ambassador to South Africa and to Paris, and it has happened in the past, and particularly when there are political appointments, then I do think in those circumstances, Mr. Speaker, that the select committee should have a role in it, and we can make the decisions better as a result.
On that point, would my honourable friend, I thank her for giving way. Mr. Speaker, I'm a member of the Foreign Affairs Committee, so with that in mind, our committee has a proposal that there should be a greater role for us in scrutinising the appointment of the US ambassador, given that they're one of the highest ranking members of the diplomatic service, and to help the government avoid this situation in the future. Does she agree with me that the government should consider this proposal seriously?
She may be that my honourable friend may be surprised to hear that I agree with her completely, and I think it is very wise. Yes, I will. Yes.
For the chairman of the select committee giving way, I've made my early comments about pre-confirmation hearings, but adding on to that, does she agree with me that where senior civil servants, whether from the Foreign Office or elsewhere, are asked to come to select committees on important matters and find some excuse not to attend those select committees, that select committees should at least have the power of summons in order that somebody gives an account, and also where those select committees have privy councillors, such in the Right Honourable Lady's case, that at least a briefing, if it's security or classification is used either truthfully or, should we say, exaggeratingly, as an excuse not to give evidence to a committee, that they can be heard on privy council terms.
The gentleman raises some very important points, and the power of select committees to summon witnesses has been an ongoing debate, and I suspect we haven't resolved it yet. The difficulty in relation to privy, and within our committee we have myself and another Privy Council member, and if we were offered Privy Council briefings, as we are sometimes, it's quite difficult, because what we want to be able to do is to do these things in public and to be able to inform the public of the work of the Foreign Office, to ensure that they understand, and when difficult decisions are being made, that the public understands why those difficult decisions are being made and all the factors that are involved in that, which is fine. We need to trust the public more than I think that sometimes that we do, and we certainly need to trust backbenchers more than sometimes we do.
Will the Right Honourable Lady do that?
I will.
I'm very grateful to the chairman of the Select Committee for giving way. She's being very generous, and she's elegantly describing due process, and she's implying, at least I think she is, that due process may have been set aside for other purposes in this case, but we know due process was done because the Prime Minister stood at that dispatch box last Wednesday and said it had been done. Unless he is using the Bill Clinton defence, and it turns out that due process was done but set aside, where does that leave the Prime Minister?
Dame Emily.
I think it's difficult to have answers to all of his questions at the moment, but I think that it is. But I think the most important thing is that there are lessons learnt. And even if all due process was followed and the inquiries were proceeded with to the letter, they clearly aren't good enough, and we need to change them. So either due process was not followed, or it was, and we need to change it. Either way, we need to work together to ensure this never happens again, because something went very wrong. Yes, I will give way for a final time, and then I will finish.
So I'm very grateful for her to generously give way. As MPs, we put the interests of the country above all else. What does she make of a decision to appoint an individual to represent our country in difficult negotiations, in the knowledge that that country had compromising information on that individual?
I mean, clearly we all think that it was a mistake. And the question is, how did that mistake occur, and how do we make sure that this sort of thing does not happen again? Because something went very wrong. Because when Lord Mandelson was appointed, red flags were obviously missed, or ignored. And on the day that the American president lands in Britain for a state visit, the government is materially worse off because we don't have an American president. And I really am finishing. Mr. Speaker, if we do not have the opportunity to scrutinise this kind of failure, then how can we make sure that we stop it and we stop it from happening again? We do need to improve our scrutiny and our decision making.
Kerry Bendel.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for granting this important emergency debate today. And I congratulate my right honourable friend for having secured it. He made a series of excellent points, as did the chair of the Foreign Affairs Select Committee. And I agree with all of those points. It is extraordinary that on the eve of the president's state visit, we are talking about the US ambassador who's been sacked in scandal. And there are as many questions that we all have as are unanswered questions. There are many questions I will also ask today, Mr. Speaker, but the Prime Minister needs to do three things. The Prime Minister needs to come clean about what he knew and when he knew it. Yes. Not send his junior ministers to cover for him. The Prime Minister needs to publish the Mandelson-Epstein files in full. The Prime Minister needs to take responsibility for the appointment of Lord Mandelson as ambassador to Washington. But the Prime Minister, Mr. Speaker, is not here because he is hiding from Parliament, hiding from questions. And I know that he is a busy man, but confidence in him and in his government rests on him being able to account for what happened. And so far, no one is taking any responsibility. We have our ambassador in the US sacked over his relationship with a man convicted of child sex offences. What's more, and this tells you everything you need to know, this was an appointment apparently forced through by the Prime Minister and/or his Chief of Staff. We see a political ally pushed ahead of qualified candidates because the Prime Minister and Morgan McSweeney admired his talent for mixing with the rich and powerful, despite his known links to a man who was publicly known as a convicted paedophile and a convicted sex trafficker. It is now very clear, given the speeches that we've heard before, Mr. Speaker, and everything in the public domain, it is now very clear that Peter Mandelson should never have been appointed. And it is now also clear that the Prime Minister knew that there were major concerns when he came to this House just last Wednesday. But instead of taking action, he expressed confidence in him. Why on earth did he do so? Was he poorly advised, or was it just his own poor judgment? In every single one of his government scandals till date, far from being the decisive man of conscience he promised to be, he has shriveled from leadership. He has dodged responsibility. He has hidden behind others, just as he's doing today, and he has come to this House and hidden behind process and lawyerly phrases. The Prime Minister has shown no courage, no judgment, no backbone. And if he can't see it, if they can't see it, I can assure them that the British public can. Prime Minister has turned out to be everything he claimed to abhor. This is a government of sleaze and scandal, and Labour MPs know it. I'll be interested to see how many of them actually stand up to defend their government. Mr. Speaker, the British public, and especially the victims of Jeffrey Epstein, deserve that for once the Prime Minister be straight and honest with us. He must immediately do three things. As I said earlier, Mr. Speaker, he must apologise to the victims of Jeffrey Epstein for ever having appointed Peter Mandelson as ambassador. How is it that this has still not happened? No apology. Second, as I said, he must publish the Mandelson-Epstein files in full, all the information that he had at his disposal, both when he made the appointment and when he came to the House last week expressing full confidence. And third, he must make sure that someone takes responsibility. Everyone now agrees that Peter Mandelson should not have been appointed. We've heard so much from my right honourable friend about endless scandal, conflicts of interest with China and indeed with Russia. So why was he appointed? Was it a failure of vetting? Was it that the advisers hid information from the Prime Minister? Or was it that the Prime Minister knew and made the decision anyway? Someone needs to take responsibility. I give way to my right honourable friend.
I'm grateful to my right honourable friend. And does she agree that we've seen a rapid transformation from the Prince of Darkness into a grovelling Lord Yum Yum? But one has to ask, why was the British Prime Minister surprised? Had he never heard the tale of the turtle and the scorpion that meet at the side of the river? Shouldn't the Prime Minister have realised that the poor old scorpion simply can't help what's in its nature?
I completely agree with my right honourable friend. I think the story is The Frog and the Scorpion. It's one of my favourite childhood stories. Everyone knows. Everyone knew what Lord Mandelson had been up to. It is simply not tenable for anyone on those benches to hold the line on this one, to bury their heads in the sand and hope it goes away, least of all the Prime Minister. But we now know that the Prime Minister was aware of the compromising emails last Wednesday at Prime Minister's questions, and yet he came to the House and said that he had confidence in his ambassador, and many of them cheered. Now they're all looking at their phones. Most of them don't have the courage to look me in the eye. They were cheering last week. Now they're full of shame. Why on earth did he do that? At any point, did he ask his staff, oh, sorry, are they proud? Are they proud? No. I'll continue. At any point, did he ask his staff what more information might surface? Because that morning, Lord Mandelson was saying more information would surface. Did he receive a briefing about this ahead of Prime Minister's questions? It is inconceivable that he did not. Inconceivable. Ministers are now claiming that new information subsequently came to light, new information that they didn't have. The story is all mixed and messed up, and they know it. What information appeared that was not in the original vetting? We'd like to hear that when the Minister gives his statement. And there are still more questions to answer. When did the Prime Minister's Chief of Staff speak with Peter Mandelson last week, and what did he discuss with him? Do they have the courage to tell us that? We are told that Morgan McSweeney spent hours on the phone to the ambassador, hours on the phone, at the same time that Lord Mandelson was dodging calls from the Foreign Office. What were they talking about? Those are questions about what happened just last week. But how did all this come to happen last year? I think the chair of the Foreign Affairs Select Committee has asked some excellent questions. But I ask the Minister this: what led to Lord Mandelson's appointment in the first place? How was it that a man with known links to a child sex offender came to be appointed? I'll give way to the honourable gentleman.
An additional question is, was there any external influence? Did Tony Blair or any of his friends, Mandelson's friends, have anything to do with this appointment?
The honourable gentleman asks a very good question, and I hope the Minister is able to provide an answer, because all of us in this House across parties want to know. We want to know how it was that Lord Mandelson's appointment happened in the first place, because as I see it, there are only three possibilities. First, that there was a failure of vetting. But are we really supposed to believe, Mr. Speaker, are we really supposed to believe that this is the security services' fault? I don't think so. Did they not drag up the intimate relationship with Jeffrey Epstein, which was discussed last week? The second possibility, a bit more likely, is that the Prime Minister's advisers kept information from him. If that happened, that would be incredibly serious. Yes, I give way to the right honourable gentleman.
It's on that particular point. Does she agree with me that no matter what happened or didn't happen, that a Prime Minister, a leader, has to shoulder the responsibility, and it's absolutely appalling, the idea that they would then blame the staff around them. It is their responsibility, they answer to the House, no excuse.
My right honourable friend makes an excellent point. This is a Prime Minister who hides behind everybody else, whether it's his advisers or whether it's his junior ministers or his backbenchers. That's what he does. And if he does want to blame advisers, which one was it? Who kept it from him? Why have they not apologised and resigned? No one taking responsibility. And thirdly, which my right honourable friend alluded to, the most likely but most worrying reason of all is that the Prime Minister had plenty of information to suggest that Lord Mandelson should not be appointed. Plenty of information, but he chose to appoint him anyway. Even at the time, Mr. Speaker, eyebrows were raised about this appointment. There were very many critics. I remember it at the time. Now we're reading in the papers that the Prime Minister overruled security advice not to appoint Lord Mandelson. Is this true? The Minister should tell us. It is time, Mr. Speaker, for the Prime Minister to come clean. He needs to come out of hiding. This issue will not go away, Mr. Speaker. The government cannot play for time. We will be back here again and again until all of these documents are published. We will be back until someone takes responsibility. This is a political crisis on top of an economic crisis, all of the government's own making. They are distracted now, but they came into office with no plan for the country, no idea what they stood for, and no vision for what they wanted to achieve. And because of this, they have been lurching from disaster to disaster. Winter fuel, tax rises, welfare chaos, scandal. The Prime Minister's failing leadership rebooted after just 1 year. The only plan that they came into office with was a promise they made again and again to the British public that they would restore honesty and integrity to government. That was their defining mission. That was their grand plan, and it is in tatters. So far, in a year, we have had an anti-corruption minister sacked for corruption, a homelessness minister sacked for evicting tenants, a housing secretary sacked for dodging housing tax, a transport secretary sacked for fraud, a director of strategy. The speechwriter apparently lost only yesterday in scandal. The minister can shake his head. It should be shame that he's shaking his head in. I have not said anything that is not true. And now finally we have a US ambassador sacked for his links with a known child sex offender. They claim to care about violence against women and girls until they actually have to do something about it. Where is the apology to those victims? I know the Prime Minister doesn't like difficult questions, Mr. Speaker, but it is his judgment that is being called into question, and he owes it to this country to come clean.
Florence Seshalum.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. First and foremost, I want to acknowledge the many victims of Jeffrey Epstein's really appalling abuse, whom for many of them, this story is not a political one, it's a personal one. And I think no one could be moved by listening to her brother and her sister on the news this Sunday, their first interview in the UK. And that void that family will now fill from losing her. So I think let's not detract from them and the many more victims who still probably haven't come forward, caught up in this scandalous and horrific abuse. Mr. Speaker, I'm going to keep my remarks short. I've just recently returned from a trade envoy visit to Nigeria, and what struck me on that visit was the hard work and dedication of our civil servants. I met with the British Deputy High Commissioner and all our diplomats working across many missions, across many countries. They do not make the headlines, but they are representing the UK with distinction week in, week out. And I know that this has been replicated across many countries. And Mr. Speaker, this includes the Deputy Ambassador in Washington, who has since taken over from Lord Mandelson, and he's been described as a highly regarded diplomat. So we wish him well in his new temporary role. The chair of my right honourable friend, the chair of the Select Committee, has rightly highlighted a number of important questions, and I hope that the government will be listening and will take full consideration of some of the... I'll give way on that.
I'm very grateful to Honourable for giving way. She is aware that I am too listed in this House as an independent, not for matters related to conduct or duty of candour, but for voting with my conscience to scrap the two-child limit policy, a policy supported by the former Labour Prime Minister Gordon Brown and the Children's Commissioner, and my suspension from the Labour whip was applied over a year ago within minutes of my vote. Does she agree with me that myself and the Mother of the House and others appear to be held to some standards, while Lord Mandelson appears to be held to another?
I thank the Honourable Member for making her point, and I think about, sadly, the number of abuse that many parliamentarians in this chamber face, particularly many BME members, for just their mere existence. I know the horrific domestic abuse that my honourable friend has also faced, and I hope that with time that the Labour leadership will look at some of the issues around suspension. She will know that that's not an issue that I'm privy to, but I know that these are many issues that many of us continue to raise with the leadership. I just wanted to finish, Mr. Speaker, by highlighting some of the many questions which I hope the Minister, when he stands up on his feet, will respond to. But I think the key question that we are all asking, and many people, including many of my constituents, are asking, is around the recruitment process going forward. Can the Minister assure the House and the Foreign Secretary, who's not here, in terms of that recruitment process going forward, that it will be strengthened, and so that in future our ambassadors will bolster the standing of our civil servants on the global stage?
To the Leader of the Liberal Democrats, Sir Ed Davey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think this debate finds the House at its best, holding the government and the Prime Minister himself properly to account. And as the Leader of the Opposition said, we may be rising for recess, but this issue will not go away. And I want to pay tribute to the Right Honourable and gallant member for Goole and Pocklington for securing this debate and for laying out the series of questions which need to be answered so we can properly hold this government to account. I'm not going to repeat all his many questions. He made a long speech and we will be rereading it, no doubt, over the next few weeks. I also want to pay tribute to the Chair of the Foreign Affairs Select Committee, the Right Honourable Lady, the member for Islington South and Finsbury. I thought her speech, showing that her committee had tried to bring Lord Mandelson to their committee to be scrutinised and were prevented from doing that, raises some very serious questions about how select committees are being ignored by this government. And I think we need to get serious about confirmatory hearings. I think the House, the public, needs to know what a select committee that is specialising in the subject thinks about such an important public appointment before that public appointment is confirmed. And I hope we will reform the processes of this House to build on what the Right Honourable Lady rightly said. And the Leader of the Opposition made some very important points about the need for disclosure from the government. We need those documents to be published if we're going to have a transparent process where we can properly hold the government to account. If they have answers, let us hear them, and then we can do that analysis. I give way to the Honourable Gentleman.
To the Right Honourable Gentleman for giving way. Much has been said about the process itself, but does he agree with me? It clearly was never worth the risk to appoint Peter Mandelson. But does he go further than that in terms of the professionalism of the role? And we've heard from my honourable friend about the reputation of our ambassadorial officials across the world. Would we be better served in the future if we looked to professionals to fill that role rather than politicians?
I think the Honourable Gentleman makes a very strong point. The previous ambassador to the United States was held in very high regard, and many people think she should be appointed for the vacancy. But I also want to mention the immediate speech before myself, the Honourable Member for Vauxhall and Camberwell Green, because I want to take on from what she said. Yes, we have all these questions to be answered and disclosures to be made, but we must remember the victims in all this. And I want to focus on the victims today because they deserve answers. When we've read those sickening messages, we think of Epstein's victims and their families. Girls as young as 14, groomed by Epstein, sexually abused by him, trafficked by him, be sexually abused by other powerful men. I've been thinking about the trauma they have gone through, not just then, but since, as they saw the man responsible for such horrific crimes escape justice for so long. They saw him convicted in 2008, but spend just 13 months in jail thanks to his powerful connections.
Would my honourable friend give way?
I give way to my honourable friend.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way. We know that the trauma of sexual violence and sexual abuse can last a lifetime, and for many people can be too much to bear, as we've seen with Virginia Giuffre. And victims of sexual violence are often silenced, often ignored, and always let down by a system that sometimes often sees powerful men protecting each other to diminish these crimes. Would my honourable friend agree that the Prime Minister should never have appointed somebody who had known links with a convicted paedophile?
I completely agree with my honourable friend, and can I pay tribute to her for the work she has done to protect vulnerable women in her career. We salute her for that work. And as we remember the victims, Madam Deputy Speaker, how must it have felt for them to see Donald Trump, one of Epstein's closest friends, and a man found liable for sexual abuse himself, become President of the United States? How must it have felt for the victims to see another of Epstein's closest friends made British ambassador to the United States? How must it have felt for the victims to hear the Prime Minister defend Lord Mandelson last week, even after we'd seen those appalling messages? How must it have felt for them to hear ministers say, even after Mandelson was sacked, that his appointment was a risk worth taking? I think that is quite shocking. I'll give way to my honourable friend.
On that point, I thank the right honourable member for giving way. The right honourable member has turned down the opportunity to dine with Donald Trump in the next couple of days, and he's been roundly criticised for that by some people who may well still be attending. Does he agree with me that this is an ample opportunity for those who are still attending to ask President Trump about his entry in that horrific book of birthday wishes for Mr. Epstein? And when they do ask him about his thoughts, can you ask them to report back to us about what he said?
I'm grateful to my honourable friend. The truth is, at these state banquets, very few people get to speak to the visiting head of state. However, the Prime Minister does. I wonder if the Prime Minister will be asking the President about his friendship with Epstein. I think he should, and I think this House thinks he should. Madam Deputy Speaker, for decades, the victims and their families have seen powerful men escape responsibility for what they did and what they knew. It should be a source of deep shame to ministers that the British government is now part of that story.
Will my right honourable friend give way?
Yes, I give way.
I thank my right honourable friend for giving way. Does he agree with me that one of the reasons that Epstein escaped justice for so long was because he was protected by other powerful men? And if we are truly to protect young people from predators, we need to ensure that the protectors of paedophiles have absolutely no place in public life.
I couldn't agree more with my honourable friend. I know she has worked for victims of domestic violence and abuse as well. And I can do no better than actually quote the words of Skye Roberts, the brother of Virginia Giuffre. She said about Lord Mandelson, he should not have been given the position in the first place. It speaks to how deep the corruption is in our systems. And Madam Deputy Speaker, not only must we hold the government to account for this, but we need to fix our systems, whether it's select committee hearings or holding the powerful to account. Our constituents lose trust in our institutions when they fail to hold people to account, and I'm proud my party, I'm sure others in this House, wish to see those reforms, not least, Madam Deputy Speaker, for the survivors, for the victims, for their families. We must hold the powerful to account, and in that regard, will the Minister, when he gets to his feet, apologise to all of Epstein's victims and their families? We need apology from the Minister today. But beyond that, will he say whether he agrees with me that the Prime Minister himself owes them a personal apology too?
We've got a substantial speaking list, and this debate is time limited to 3 hours, so the backbenchers are on a 6-minute speaking limit, and I call John Slinger.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I wish to express my sympathy with all the victims of Jeffrey Epstein and put on record my respect for the family of Virginia Giuffre, who spoke so movingly about her on the BBC at the weekend. Madam Deputy Speaker, listening to the debate here and in the media over recent days, I am struck by the similarities to the debate that took place over many years concerning the appointment of Mr. Andy Coulson, as the Director of Communications in Downing Street, from the point of his resignation in 2011 to his conviction for phone hacking in 2014, an appointment which David Cameron consistently said he would not have made if he had known at the time the information that subsequently came to light. But for that reason, the question was constantly asked in this House and beyond. Why did the security processes Mr. Coulson went through prior to his appointment not uncover his past involvement in phone hacking? Some people pointed to the fact that, unlike previous occupants of his role, Mr. Coulson had not gone through developed vetting until long after his appointment, and indeed had to resign before completing that process. But when this issue was directly discussed at the Leveson inquiry, this was the exchange between Lord Justice Leveson and the former Cabinet Secretary Lord O'Donnell, which it is important to recall today. Lord O'Donnell said, "I think some people have different understandings of what developed vetting would reveal. It wouldn't have gone into enormous detail about phone hacking, for example." Lord Justice Leveson replied, "No, it's concerned with whether you're likely to be a risk." Lord O'Donnell then said, "Yes, whether basically you're blackmailable." David Cameron relied on that exchange in this House after Andy Coulson's conviction on the 25th of June 2014, when he said firstly, and I think correctly, that Coulson's security clearance was a matter for the civil service, not for the Prime Minister. And secondly, that even if Coulson had been fully DV'd, it would not have uncovered evidence of his involvement in phone hacking. And I mention this issue now not to reopen the issue over Andy Coulson's security clearance, or Dominic Cummings for that matter, but simply to remind honourable members opposite that it is not new to have these kind of questions raised around the vetting of senior appointees. It is certainly not an issue that is specific to this government or the particular appointment of Lord Mandelson, and they would do well to remember that before they get too high on their horse in today's debate. I won't give way. I will give way.
I thank the honourable member for giving way, but this really isn't hard. Isn't it enough knowing that Lord Mandelson enjoyed the patronage of a convicted child sex offender by staying in his houses? Wasn't that enough to prevent his appointment as our most senior ambassador?
I thank the honourable lady for her intervention. What I'm doing in my speech is setting out for the House very useful context within which this debate, it is useful. Honourable members can shunter from sedentary position, but it is useful context. And finally, no, I won't give away again. I'm coming to the conclusion of my remarks, Madam Deputy Speaker. Madam Deputy Speaker, the Right Honourable Member for Goole and Poplington spoke somewhat mockingly of the strange coincidences of politics given the presentation of the Public Office Accountability Bill earlier today. Now, my right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, is a man of integrity. He has shown that he believes in accountability and he acts on it. The Leader of the Opposition can reel off a list of ministers who have been sacked, but that rather proves my point. Frankly, this is a welcome change, and no matter how uncomfortable recent events have been, we are seeing, under this Prime Minister, that public officials, ministers, and yes, ambassadors are being held to higher standards than previously, and I welcome that.
Right, I call the father of the House, Sir Edward.
Well, that speech we've just heard was absolutely risible, frankly. And I just give him some advice. You know, don't do the whip's office dirty work for them.
Excuse me.
Oh, well, of course I gave way to him. Yeah.
Thank you. I thank the right honourable gentleman. I'd like to give him some advice. Please do not patronise me.
Yeah, I'm just trying to give him some helpful advice, but there we are. Oh, well, of course.
Actually, it's advice for the member opposite. Those that lick the feet of the unworthy gain them for themselves nothing but a dirty tongue.
But joking apart, this is really a very serious moment for our country and for Parliament. Whether you like him or not, President Trump is of incredible importance to our country. He's just about to arrive here. He just must think that we in this country are complete plonkers, frankly, for the way that we've handled all this. First of all, he had a very good relationship with the previous ambassador. Yep. She was just swept aside. And then a man was appointed who had produced him in the past. All right, that man is a skilled operator and has built up a relationship. President Trump himself probably is rather embarrassed about his relationship with Epstein. And then he finds all over the media, this is dragged up a day before one of his most important visits, which is of great importance to his country and our country. And he knows that there are going to be very difficult questions in the press conference. The President of the United States must be absolutely furious about what is going on. So this is a very serious moment for us, and we have to take it extremely seriously. And I hope, and I'm sure the government does. Now, I'll just repeat what I said in the urgent question on Thursday. I've seen so many of these scandals. And it's usually not the original scandal or alleged scandal that is the problem. It's the cover-up. And therefore, to try and be helpful to the government, we've already heard from the chair of the Foreign Affairs Select Committee. It is just an absurd part of our processes that if there is a monumental scandal, then we have a public inquiry, and officials, ministers, everybody must be dragged, every document must be produced to the public inquiry, but governments can just brush aside a select committee. So I just tell them, and I'm generally trying to be helpful now. Obviously, a bad mistake was made, but an even worse mistake is being made if you're not honest with Parliament and you don't release every single document. And there are so many questions that need to be asked and could be answered if the government, the Foreign Office, was honest in these questions. Why was Mandelson chosen, given his known past associations with Epstein and his previous sackings? Were the risks merely misjudged, or did the existing vetting process fail to assess them properly? And the Prime Minister claimed he didn't know the full extent of the emails. We've no reason not to take him at his word. Obviously, he tells the truth. But this raises serious questions about what assurances of information he received, from whom, and whether that constituted adequate due diligence. What exact checks were carried out at appointment stage? What was known, by whom, and when? If some of the unsavoury aspects of the former ambassador's friendship with Mr. Epstein were known but deemed worth the risk, what criteria were used to make that decision? Was the Cabinet Office's propriety and ethics team sufficiently rigorous? Was any personal, institutional or political bias exhibited in how risks were weighed? The government has stated commitments on transparency, integrity and protecting victims of abuse or sexual violence. Having a senior representative like an ambassador whose past communications appear to mitigate, defend or minimise a convicted child sex offender must run counter to these values. And was that considered at that stage of the vetting process? How does the government reconcile this incident with its stated positions? Why was the appointment made knowing there were links without understanding their full extent? Why was the Prime Minister publicly defending Lord Mandelson up until the revelations emerged, only to sack him less than a day when the media pressure rose? Was he sacked for the content of what was revealed, or merely because the situation became embarrassing? Lord Mandelson was appointed to arguably the most important diplomatic role in Her Majesty's diplomatic service. This is a time of intense international pressure. So, as I mentioned already, President Trump is operating the levers of power in a way that we have rarely seen in the post-war world. What assessment has the government made of the damage done to Britain's diplomatic standing by having such an important ambassador removed abruptly under scandal? Light is the best disinfectant, and the public have a right, and this House, through its Select Committee, has a right to be informed. Ministers must ensure us that the full record of Lord Mandelson's communication with Epstein be disclosed, and soon. We must also be told whether any of the information the Prime Minister, the Foreign Secretary or any other minister have provided to the public has turned out to be inaccurate, whether intentionally or in good faith. While the ambassador has been sacked, this incident, Madam Deputy Speaker, is far from over. There are too many questions which remain unanswered. It is the obligation and the responsibility of government to ensure that Parliament and the public are given a full and frank exposition of this matter.
Stephen Flynn.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I often think it's a grave pity in this House that the cameras tend to just be trained on the individual speaking, because it meant that the public did not get the opportunity that we did earlier on to look at the faces of the Labour MPs as this debate began, to see the glum, serious look on their faces as they recognise the significance of the situation that faces their Prime Minister here and now. And I'm sure it's a glum, angry, serious look that's shared not just by the Treasury front bench in the building here today, but those who are flogged in the public domain across broadcasting stations throughout the course of last week. And if I may, the Chief Whip is no longer in his place, but I would like to think that on Sunday that was the first occasion where he was happy to be in his new role, so he did not have to appear on the Sunday media rounds as the Business Secretary to defend the indefensible, to tell us all in the public domain that Peter Mandelson has singular qualities that nobody else on these Isles, nobody else on the planet possibly have, that make him fitting to be the ambassador to the United States of America. What a pitiful state to find ourselves in. What a pitiful state for the Prime Minister to find himself in. And this is mired in politics, I hate to say, because this is a political decision by the Prime Minister. He chose to stand at that dispatch box last week and not tell us, but tell the public that there was nothing to see here, that he had absolute confidence in Lord Mandelson. It is the Prime Minister who chose to ignore the facts that were plainly in front of him, not for weeks, not for hours, not for days, but for months. He was the man who appointed Peter Mandelson to be the ambassador to fuck off, because it was being, his quote, not mine, because he was being inquired about his relationship with Jeffrey Epstein. That was what Lord Mandelson said. He said it was an FT obsession. Well, guess what? It's our obsession now. And we are going to make sure that we get to the bottom of this. The Prime Minister is not above the scrutiny of the House of Commons, neither is he above the scrutiny of the public at home. But the greatest scandal of all, is the fact that the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom appointed a man to that role, knowing that that man had maintained a relationship with Jeffrey Epstein, despite the fact that Jeffrey Epstein had been convicted in 2008 in Florida. Convicted for having 14-year-old girls masturbate him. And the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom thought it was fitting for the best friend of that individual to hold the highest diplomatic office in the United States of America on behalf of the people of these Isles. What a complete disgrace. And the only thing that seems to have caused any consternation for the Prime Minister in any of this is not that that happened, but the fact that for a short period, Peter Mandelson appeared to think Jeffrey Epstein was innocent. Which draws us to the conclusion that if Peter Mandelson had thought that Jeffrey Epstein had maintained the friendship but thought he was guilty, he would still be in post. What has happened to the moral compass of this place, of the office of Prime Minister, where we can simply accept a rationale such as that? How can any victim of child sex abuse in these Isles or elsewhere have confidence in the structures that we put in place when the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, and the Minister shakes his head? Is there an intervention that he wants to make? Is there something that he disagrees with in that assessment of those facts? Or does he want to present the additional detail to this House which makes any of that untrue whatsoever? No. I notice he's not shaking his head now, but I tell you who is shaking their head: the public at him and his Prime Minister for the decisions that they have taken. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, we're going into recess. All of us are mindful of the fact that this House is shutting down. But when we come back, we expect answers. The Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, he hopes that this is going to go away. But I and every other member who is sitting in this House right now can assure him that it is not.
Just for a moment, please be seated. Colleagues, there are children in the gallery. Let's keep our language tempered, make sure that we're being moderate in everything that we say. And I'll call Sir Alex Shalbrook.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and it's a pleasure to follow on from the honourable gentleman for the speech he's just made, and indeed the very fact that my right honourable friend, the member for Goole and Pocklington, was able to outline so clearly what today is about, Madam Deputy Speaker, and what today is about is an exceptionally serious matter. We are talking about the appointment of somebody who would have to have the highest security clearance, higher than a lot of ministers, having sensitive information go across his desk at the same time, and yet at the same time in the public domain was known that this individual was severely compromised. And that should raise a question for everybody. The Labour backbenchers, the government backbenchers, have been following today's debate in a state of despair, and I actually admire them for that, because they understand the gravity of the situation we are talking about. And as the honourable gentleman just drew on, the minister sat on that front bench for Brighton, Kemp Town and Peacehaven has done nothing but treat this debate so far with contempt. He was smirking at my right honourable friend, the Leader of the Opposition. He has been shaking his head against some of the allegations made which are in the public domain. And Madam Deputy Speaker, that speaks to a apparent attitude going on at the heart of this government. You know, I have a huge amount of respect for the Minister who's going to have to respond to this debate. We work closely together and he is a good man. But he has been sent to the slaughter today. This is a decision that was made around the cabinet table. This is a decision where the minister last week had to come to this House and announce that the Prime Minister had instructed the Foreign Secretary to withdraw the ambassador. Where is the Foreign Secretary, Madam Deputy Speaker? This is one of the most serious issues this House has debated in this Parliament, and they've sent the Minister once again to answer these questions. And to be fair to the Minister, many questions can be put and he's not going to be able to answer them. And that's why he's been sent here today, because he can push it off into the distance. And I say again, Madam Speaker, I have nothing but respect for the Minister. We work closely together in international affairs and the work on NATO, and he's always been honest up front, and I know he must be dreading this today, because on Thursday he came to this House and literally, and maybe he can tell us when he actually did know that the ambassador had been withdrawn, because beforehand he certainly looked like a man who was slightly worried about what he had to go into this House and do. I give way to the honourable gentleman.
I talk to my constituents, and it is a fact that the last few days they've talked about little else. Now, alluding to what the leader of the SNP in this place said, this issue is not going to go away. I hope politicians realise that, because it will get bigger and bigger as time goes on. And to take up the point made by the honourable gentleman, these questions are going to have to be answered. There's no two ways about it. And when the general public speaks so firmly to me in that way, and to all of us, we know they speak the truth.
I'm grateful to the honourable gentleman, and I think, Madam Deputy Speaker, let's not shy away from what this is about. This is about a man who defended a convicted paedophile which most people know would fail any vetting process because you'd be compromised. The person could be compromised when defending someone of those serious criminal offences. We know in the public domain how much he was in hock to this convicted paedophile, and yet processes were overridden. Madam Deputy Speaker, the Honourable Member for Rugby raked up the past and said things which, quite frankly, the resignation of a Director of Communications is very different to the withdrawal of an ambassador with top secret access. But let me say, Madam Deputy Speaker, that when we were in government, we didn't exactly not have our scandals and heartaches that we had to go through. And may I remind the House that what did Boris Johnson as a Prime Minister was not all the allegations that used to be thrown from that side of the House. It was when he said to this House that he was not aware of any of the allegations made against Chris Pincher, and then it turned out that he had evidence that he was aware. Now, we know that this Prime Minister stood at that dispatch box on Wednesday and said he had not been made aware and he did not have any documents, when we now know that his office had them. So the question has to be answered, when did he know, and how can that be shown that he didn't know beforehand? Because this party moved against that Prime Minister when it became apparent that he did know. And I look at those Labour backbenchers and those who are giving opinions in the press and say to them, do you have the courage now to move against a Prime Minister who has done exactly what the former Prime Minister Boris Johnson did in this country, and this party moved against him when those allegations became clear that it wasn't correct? You know, it's said, Madam Deputy Speaker, that the buck stops here. Well, the buck really needs to stop here. I give way to the Honourable Member.
I thank the Honourable Gentleman. He refers to the previous Prime Minister as having conducted himself in certain ways. One of those ways was not actually having an independent ethics advisor for a period of time. Whereas this Prime Minister has an independent ethics advisor and acts on their advice.
Madam Deputy Speaker, the reason I took that intervention because I know the Honourable Gentleman wouldn't be able to help himself. And the reality is that the Prime Minister made out all this thing about, I've appointed an ethics advisor, I've done this, and yet when asked the very straightforward question by the BBC, would you sack a minister who's broken the ethics code, he couldn't answer. He obfuscated as he always does. This is smoke and mirrors, Madam Deputy Speaker, and this is exactly the situation we find ourselves in today. It is not good enough to say we didn't know. I come back to it, Madam Deputy Speaker. We are talking about people who were subject to a paedophile, who watched somebody who defended that paedophile get put to one of the highest offices in the world, carrying some of the greatest secrets of state, and yet this Prime Minister said, that's all fine, we'll override it. I don't want to go beyond the 6 minutes I was allowed, Madam Deputy Speaker, so I will just ask these questions to the ministers, but you know, some of them have been implied, but well, I'm afraid I won't. I don't want to test the patience of the House. There's a lot of people want to speak. The question that the Minister has to answer today is decisively who knew what when. He has to answer who made the decision to award the ambassadorship to Peter Mandelson, what lobbying took place to do that, why was such a distinguished ambassador such as Karen Pierce, who any of us who have been to America working in international affairs, when they met Dame Karen, knows she was one of the most respected and capable ambassadors, and that it cannot be true to say that she would not have been able to carry out the task which members sitting around that cabinet table today feels the man was worth the risk. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker.
Sir John Whittingdale.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. There have been some very powerful speeches in this debate from both sides of the House, and one of the things which is apparent is that everybody is agreed that Peter Mandelson should never have been appointed as ambassador to Washington. It matters because ambassadors are critically important to our nation. They are the leaders in projecting our soft power. They are viewed as embodiments of the United Kingdom, and it is them who influence very largely how the UK is perceived. As has been said, we have had some really good ambassadors to the United States, going back to the late Sir Christopher Mayor, who I knew well, who did a terrific job, Lord Kim Darroch, and has been said, Dame Karen Pierce. And even sometimes there have been good political appointments. There was a certain amount of controversy when Peter Jay was appointed US ambassador. He was the son-in-law of the Prime Minister, but he did a reasonable job. Ed Llewellyn became our ambassador in Paris and now Rome and has done a terrific job. But as the chair of the Select Committee pointed out, when Ed Llewellyn was appointed, because it was a political appointment, he was interrogated by the Select Committee. As the chair has said, the committee of which I serve have attempted several times, indeed numerous times, to have Peter Mandelson appear. We are told that by the Foreign Office in their most recent letter to the chair of the committee, the committee did have an opportunity to talk to him on a visit to Washington. Well, I can say, because I was at both meetings, the first was a briefing about the state of American politics when we first arrived, and the second was a breakfast where he hosted opinion formers to discuss with us what was happening in the US Capitol. At no stage did we have any opportunity to cross-examine or ask Peter Mandelson the questions which we would wanted to ask had he appeared before the Select Committee, and it is ridiculous to try and suggest that that somehow is compensation for his failure to appear. Of course I can...
I'm grateful to the Right Honourable Member, and having been there with him at those Foreign Affairs Committee meetings, we should also say that there was no opportunity for us to quiz Lord Mandelson in a public setting.
He is absolutely right, and it would have been important that we had that opportunity. Maybe had we done so, some of the questions which are now being asked could have been asked then, and we could have explored rather more why the decision was taken to appoint him, which I have to say is still causing bewilderment to a large number of people. But as has been said, it is now apparent that he should never have been appointed. I'm not going to recap what my right honourable friend, the member for Goole, and many others have said about his record, about his previous resignations, about his unsavoury links, all of which should have rung every alarm bell. But of course I give way.
I'm grateful to my honourable friend. He's making a very important intervention. Does he not agree, though, there is a tendency to say, well, this debate is about what we can do in the future? This debate is about what has gone wrong in the past and the government's role in that, and for the Prime Minister to shoulder the responsibility and take us through what he knew.
I think my right friend is absolutely right, and actually the two are related. Because lessons learned and what we do in the future, we can only determine the lessons and decide what to do in the future if we know what went wrong this time. And in order to know, we have to obtain the answers to the questions. Now, the chair of the Select Committee actually set out a number of very important questions, and she ran through those in her contribution, and we have now had an answer from the Foreign Office. She referred to the letter that was sent to her. What we know from the letter, and it doesn't tell us much, what we know from the letter, first of all, is the Foreign Office had nothing really to do with it. They say to us that the appointment was carried out following the Propriety and Ethics Committee investigation, which was carried out in the Cabinet Office. The Foreign Office was then told of this. They were instructed to appoint Lord Mandelson as ambassador, and after his appointment was announced, the FCDO started the ambassadorial appointment process, including national security vetting. Now, national security vetting, deep vetting has been referred to. We need to know what that says. However, we are told by the Foreign Office that the process of national security vetting is independent of ministers who are not informed of any findings other than the final outcome. So essentially, what appears to have been the case is that the Foreign Office is saying, well, we told his past, but we're not going to be told anything about what was uncovered, about the questions that were asked, what his answers would be. And yet this is somebody who already had very serious offences against him that had caused him to resign twice, where there were real question marks about his record, both as a European Commissioner, about some of his friendships. All of these, one assumes, must have been asked at deep vetting, and yet he passed. The final outcome was fine, he can be appointed, and the Foreign Office are told that, and they're not given any other detail. I mean, frankly, I find that completely astonishing. And it does raise the questions even more seriously, that we must find out what that process was and what the deep vetting showed, and why, if it really is the case that ministers were not given any detail about what the process uncovered, they didn't actually ask any questions about it. And that is something which I look forward to the minister addressing when he responds. I give way to another of my fellow members of the committee.
I thank the honourable member for giving way, and he's right to highlight the repeated request that the committee made to meet with Lord Mandelson before his appointment. He also raises the various responses that we've got from the Foreign Secretary, and the important fact that there are questions over the suitability of the appointment. There must also be questions over the Prime Minister's judgment. Did he ask to see the PET report before making the appointment? Did he ask to see the security vetting report? Did he read them? Did he go ahead despite their content?
Asks very valid questions, and we do need to have the answers to all of those. And he and I know he will join me in pressing for the Foreign Affairs Committee to continue to press this case, but it may well be that another body, perhaps the liaison committee that does have the opportunity to interrogate the Prime Minister, will also pursue these matters. Because as has been said several times in the debate, this is not going to go away. There is real anger out there across this House and in the country, and people will demand to know answers. We attempted today to try and begin to put those questions by summoning two members from the Foreign Office and from the Cabinet Office, and the committee was told that neither was available. Well, I can tell the House that I have some experience at summoning people who don't wish to attend before select committees, and there is a procedure. And I hope that when we return after a recess, the committee will pursue these matters, that we will require ministers to appear, and if they don't do so, or if others refuse, then we will look to see what other actions can be taken. But I've finished by saying these are very serious matters. The questions have been asked, the answers so far have not been forthcoming, and we will go on pursuing this until they are.
Marvellous. I assume that's everybody that's wishing to contribute is actually bobbing. There seems to be a lot of movement in the chamber. Okay. Rachel Gilmore.
Deputy Speaker, and I would like to congratulate the Right Honourable Member for Gould and Pocklington for securing this debate. Like all of us in this chamber, our thoughts are first and foremost with the victims of that dreadful man whose name I refuse to mention. A week is a long time in politics, and last week saw the Prime Minister stand at the dispatch box to back and then sack the now former ambassador to the United States. In Prime Minister's questions last week, my party leader, the Right Honourable Member for Kingston and Surbiton, questioned the Prime Minister on Lord Mandelson's appointment, and the Prime Minister stood by it, confirming that rigorous background checks had taken place. This entire situation has left a nasty taste in the mouth, to put it mildly, that the ambassador to the US, the most coveted ambassadorial position in the United Kingdom by many metrics, was seemingly okay with the moral turpitude of the ban I will not mention, even following his conviction. This casts a long shadow on Britain's place in the world. The timing and nature of this, not that it could ever be anything other than terrible, is catastrophically bad. The optics are dreadful. While we should be demonstrating moral leadership in an increasingly volatile international climate, our own emissary to our closest ally has been discredited by scandal. The President of the United States lands in this country today for his unprecedented second state visit. Whilst the Prime Minister wines and dines him, will he be taking a principled stand on the matters of great importance to the metre of this country? Will he be pressing on Gaza? Will he be making progress on our long-awaited bespoke trade deal to insulate ourselves from Trump's tariffs? Will he be supporting our NATO allies in making the case for better US engagement with the defence of Ukraine and shoring up Europe's eastern flank to Russian incursions in Poland and Romania? As if not already bad enough,
This murky affair has been thickened by the fact that a source from MI6 has reportedly claimed that they failed to clear Mandelson and warned that his links to the man I still refuse to name would, quote, compromise him. Downing Street pressed ahead with the appointment anyway. It is vital that the Civil Service Commission now investigates whether the ambassador broke the Diplomatic Service Code by failing to come clean over these revelations sooner. If it is true, it raises wider questions about what other advice from the Social Security Services was neglected. Why did Downing Street officials fail this most basic duty? Why did the team in number 10 send the Prime Minister out to bat, sticking to the line of confidence in Mandelson, only to defenestrate him a few hours later? Why was the Prime Minister not on top of his brief? And if it is the case that key details and information were withheld from the Prime Minister, why has no one been outed and swiftly given the boot? In the late 1920s, Madam Deputy Speaker, there was a famous German philosopher called Karl Popper, and he famously said that those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it. It is my sincere hope that this is not the case for this government, for whom I have usually a degree of some respect. There are so many questions, and we on these benches and my constituents of Tiverton and Minehead demand answers. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker.
Luke Evans.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And I must admit, when we heard that this debate was granted, I thought long and hard about what I could add or what I could say or what I could do to take part in the debate, whether I even should. And already, as we've gone through this debate, many of the questions that spring to mind have been asked, the process questions about where, when, why, how, etc., far more eloquently and far more in detail than I could put down. Because in essence, it does come down to the fact that this was a political appointment, and so the PM is the person who should carry the risk. That's the job. If it's someone else's, then we need to know who that is. So stepping back a little bit, I thought about, well, what would the man and woman on the Hinckley High Street say if I talked to them about it? Because they do talk about it, and it does hit hard to them. And they have many of the process questions that we have as well. And I reflect on the fact that stepping back, this to me seems a bit of a Pyrrhic victory, if I'm being honest. I'm acutely aware that the sword of hypocrisy has a blade on both sides, and swung heavily in this House can hit both sides equally. But it's not the wound that can kill. It's the subsequent infection afterwards.
Cover up.
That is the problem that we're seeing here today. And so when the member for Rugby stands up and points in the past and talks about context, he is right. Context is important to the public in this debate, and we are paying the price on this side of the House because of some of the decisions that have happened before us. And it wasn't the fact that a previous Prime Minister ate cake, it was about the fact that it was then covered up. And we had to come to this House to say there was a report that we felt the Prime Minister lied. Now, the new Prime Minister came in saying there will be change. There will be something different. That was his words. It was even on the lectern, time for change. Here lies the problem. Because when the Minister who was Transport Secretary was found out to have committed fraud, when the Anti-Corruption Minister was investigated for corruption, when the Homelessness Minister had to resign because of making people homeless, and the Deputy Prime Minister and Housing Secretary hadn't paid their tax, it wasn't because the Prime Minister pushed them out there. It was because the media in this place did its job to hold them to account. And that's the difference that I'm looking for today.
My honourable friend, give way.
I will.
I'm grateful to my honourable friends. Building on that point, does he find it absolutely vital that if our right honourable friend, the Leader of the Opposition, hadn't taken down the Prime Minister step by step last week, that we may be going to a recess with this scrutiny still not happening?
spot on, and I think it's respect should be given to many people who've raised this, including the Leader of the Opposition, but many in the media, many people on the backbenches on both sides of the House who have also raised concerns. And this is my primary point, because the Prime Minister said he wanted to do something different. Well, what could he do different? He could come to this House and tell people the truth, answer those questions. There is nothing stopping him from delivering a statement himself, putting himself up in front of scrutiny to answer those questions. He could convene a committee for the House. I'm sure many would be happy to attend to answer the questions that are put before him.
I
will.
Yeah, it's a point that keeps being raised time and again. We talk about this 3-week gap now. But the reality is key select committees can continue through the recess to investigate this issue, which they should do, and call the Prime Minister to give evidence so that we don't wait 3 weeks in the hope that it dies. That's the key.
My right honourable friend is absolutely spot on. But there is a key difference, actually, I would say, because the Prime Minister said he would do things differently.
I know.
The leadership means he could come forward himself to be here at the dispatch box. Because I have a huge amount of respect for the Minister who's going to have to defend this. But he is not the decision maker. He is not the risk holder when it comes to this debate and this decision. And therein lies the point. And this is why I'm sad today, because I think this is what the public will see. They will look on and say that a new Prime Minister came in on a landslide majority saying he's going to do things differently by his own standards that he set, and has chosen not to. He's ignored the questions, he's answered the media, and his one outing to it says, I wouldn't have made the decision if I knew the information. That isn't good enough for the public to understand. So, I finish where I started to say, I really do think today is a Pyrrhic victory, a hollow victory. But I do live in hope, Madam Deputy Speaker. I live in hope that on the day that the government is introducing the Public Office Accountability Bill, I'm hopeful that the Prime Minister could still lead the change that he set out. He could still live by his own standards that he set for himself and his government. And he could still now clear up once and for all exactly what happened. And I live in hope that that might be the case.
Well done.
Richard Tice.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Well, the reality is that the Prime Minister personally decided to appoint Lord Mandelson as the Ambassador to the United States, and in so doing, he has humiliated and embarrassed this nation on the international stage, because this Lord Mandelson is someone who described himself as the best pal of a paedophile. Someone who advised that paedophile, when in prison, to use that time in prison as an opportunity. Truly shocking. And there are two separate issues here that require proper examination. Firstly, the judgment of the Prime Minister, and then secondly, did he inadvertently mislead the House last Wednesday in responding to the Leader of Opposition? And let's look at the judgment of the Prime Minister. We know now that he received a 2-page document as he made the personal decision to appoint Lord Mandelson, outlining some of his links to the paedophile. And yet he carried on with that decision to appoint him. So he made that appointment in that knowledge. That is woefully, woefully incompetent judgment. He then made the judgment last week in the knowledge that there was a cache of emails about Lord Mandelson's links to this paedophile. He made the judgment as a lawyer who supposedly is forensic, not to ask the questions about what was in the emails. That seems to me an absolute failure of judgment. And then he made the judgment to come to this House and say that he had confidence in the man over whom he knew there was a cache of emails that he thought it was inappropriate to ask the detail about. The whole point of lawyers and barristers is they do that DD, that diligence. But no, not our Prime Minister. Which brings me on to the critical issue of whether the Prime Minister inadvertently misled the House. He said two things to the Leader of the Opposition. Firstly, twice, he said he had confidence in Lord Mandelson. And yet he knew the day before there's a cache of emails that he didn't want to know the detail of about Lord Mandelson's links to Epstein. And then, the day after, he fired him. How is it credulous to believe that you can have confidence in a man given those two facts within a 24-hour period? Even more significantly, the Prime Minister said that full due process had been followed during the appointment. We now learn that this is not the case, because actually the due process was carried out after the decision by the Prime Minister to appoint Lord Mandelson and after it had been announced to the world at large. And therefore, those two things cannot be true. Either full due process was carried out before the decision to appoint, or it was carried out afterwards. It was not carried out during. And for that reason, I regrettably conclude personally that the Prime Minister inadvertently misled this House of Commons and the British people. And I think, therefore, that this Prime Minister needs to come to the House and give absolute clarity on what he knew, when, why he made those decisions, and why he chose not to ask the detailed forensic investigations at the appropriate time.
Just remind members to temper their speeches, and we do not at any point accuse other members of dishonesty. And I know the next member will get that right. Sarah Ball.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. There are rare moments when both sides of the House come to this chamber with the same question on their minds. How did it get to this? The Prime Minister is very proud of his record as the Director of Public Prosecutions, his skills to prosecute, to interrogate and to investigate. Skills that are absent here. The Prime Minister will also be more than familiar with the basic legal principle, caveat emptor, buyer beware. This can be translated across the board to many scenarios and essentially means you are to do your research and ask pointed questions. Madam Deputy Speaker, on this point, the Prime Minister in interviews exposed himself yesterday. He claims he did not know the content of the Bloomberg emails, but yet he knew they existed. Where was the inquiry? He knew an investigation was launched by the Foreign Office, but not the content. Where was the inquiry? He was waiting for answers from the disgraced ambassador, even though his chief of staff, we understand, was in contact with him for much of the previous day. Where was the inquiry? In the knowledge that there were outstanding questions unanswered, anyone, and not just a lawyer, would have drawn breath and paused before giving such a vote of confidence in the former ambassador during PMQs. It is willful ignorance at best, political belligerence at worst. The Prime Minister now says, had I known, I quote, had I known then what I know now, I would never have appointed him. But the former Foreign Secretary has said, the truth is all the issues were weighed, and in that time it was known that Peter Mandelson had a relationship with Jeffrey Epstein, but the scale and extent of that was only known last Wednesday evening when the Prime Minister surveyed those emails. But we understand that the Foreign Office contacted Number 10 on Tuesday and an investigation was opened. So something doesn't add up. There is such a lack of clarity on this matter, and where there is a lack of clarity, we need transparency. A proper due diligence exercise relies on the disclosure given, as he will be well aware from practice. It is time to disclose. So I am sure, therefore, that the government will oblige with the request from the Leader of the Opposition to provide the House with all correspondence and documents on the Mandelson files. The matter, however, goes beyond judgment calls of both the Prime Minister and the former Foreign Secretary, given that both are involved in the appointment of ambassadors. It is also a matter of ethics. What is deemed acceptable behaviour when in positions of power? Now, the Nolan principles are integral to all of us who serve the public. Selflessness, integrity, objectivity, accountability, openness, honesty and leadership. Principles that apply as much to the former ambassador as to the Prime Minister. Now, under leadership, it states that holders of public office should, I quote, actively promote and robustly support the principles and challenge poor behaviour wherever it occurs. Given the known record of Peter Mandelson, even before the details of the Bloomberg emails came to light, does the Prime Minister believe that this principle has been met? On this basis, will the Prime Minister be referring himself and others involved in the appointment process to the Independent Ethics Advisor? The role of ambassador in Washington is a crucial one, entrusted with the most sensitive information and shaping our reputation on the world stage. It is not too much to ask that its appointee embodies the highest standards.
Wendy Wharton.
Speaker, let's be absolutely crystal clear. This is an emergency debate about honesty, integrity and the credibility of this Labour government. It's about what the Prime Minister knew and when he knew it regarding Lord Mandelson's links to Jeffrey Epstein. The public deserve the truth, and instead they've been treated to evasion, delay and, as my constituents have been very clear, a cover-up. The decision to appoint Lord Mandelson as Britain's ambassador to the US was extraordinary. The links between Mandelson and Epstein were well known. We've heard it this afternoon. The vetting process surely should have raised red flags. And yet the Prime Minister, yes, the Prime Minister, oversaw the appointment. And where is he today? More happy to talk to the BBC, perhaps, than at the dispatch box. He told us himself he had confidence in Lord Mandelson, even as the questions mounted and the damning Bloomberg emails were about to surface. That surely was not an accident. It was a choice, and one that goes to the heart of the Prime Minister's judgment. So let us remind ourselves what those emails revealed. Mandelson offering words of support to a convicted paedophile. These were not casual contacts, but sustained and deeply troubling links. Yet when pressed on what he knew, the Prime Minister's story shifted. First, perhaps ignorance, then awareness of media inquiries, then the claim he had not seen the contents until the last moment. And all the while, the Prime Minister's Chief of Staff was in touch with Lord Mandelson much of the day before PMQs. So which is it? This House deserves answers to the most basic questions about a scandal engulfing the Prime Minister and his own ambassador, or ex-ambassador. But this is not an isolated lapse. We saw two of the Prime Minister's most senior appointments unravel in recent weeks. It seems to me that Labour likes to lecture us all about integrity, but in little more than a year in office they are mired in scandal, putting loyalty to insiders ahead of the basic decency the public rightly expect. And while the government is tying itself in knots, our country faces grave challenges. Last week, Russian drones crossed into Polish airspace, testing NATO's resolve. Bond rates here at home have hit their highest in 30 years. Illegal migrant boat crossings reached record numbers in this year, 2025. And in the West Midlands, bin strikes roll on into their sixth month, while Labour MPs from the city and the region sit silent. And in my own constituency, swathes of our precious Greenbelt are under siege because of Labour's planning reforms. These are the issues my constituents expect this place to be focused on. But instead, the Prime Minister is distracted by a scandal of his own making. So let's just get back to the central question. What must now happen? I think the answer is simple. The Mandelson-Epstein files must be released in full, urgently, and without caveats. That means the two-page vetting document and the evidence behind it. That means all correspondence between the Chief of Staff and Lord Mandelson. That means the communications between the Foreign Office, Number 10, and our embassy in Washington about the Bloomberg files. And that means any other documents presented to the Prime Minister in making the appointment. This House and the public that we serve have a right to see them. Recess will be upon us within literally hours, but this scandal cannot and it must not be sent into recess in the hope that this failing government can sweep it under the carpet. Because the longer that Labour refuses to publish the files, the more damning the conclusion becomes, and the more damaging to democracy in our country and to the trust of the public. Madam Deputy Speaker, the opposition, well, benches rather, went into last year's election on the slogan of change. Well, every day they're demonstrating it, that it's change for the worse. At a moment when we should be projecting clarity, strength and integrity on the world stage, we are instead led by a Prime Minister distracted by scandal and paralysed by poor judgment. It's time to end the rumour, publish the files and finally put his country before narrow party interests. Nothing less will do.
Jim Allister.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I want to use the few minutes that I have to focus on how it could be that the Prime Minister of this country just last Wednesday came to tell this House that he had confidence in the friend of the paedophile, Lord Mandelson, in his role as the key ambassador for this government. He said that not once, but twice, when the Leader of the Opposition rightly asked him. He declared himself, I have confidence in him. I have confidence in the ambassador. Those were his ringing endorsements of Lord Mandelson. And I want to examine the circumstances that then prevailed when he said those words, that he has confidence. What is confidence? Confidence is that you trust someone. Confidence is that you have faith in them. Confidence is that you have belief in them. So that is what he was telling this House in respect of Lord Mandelson. That was on Wednesday. And yet on Monday, we know, as a matter of public knowledge, that the Bloomberg emails had been published. Prime Minister since has made some startling claims. He has said that when at Prime Minister's question he was answering, he knew that questions were being asked. He told us that at Prime Minister's questions he only knew of media inquiries about the emails. And he knew that questions had been put to Lord Mandelson. Now, our Prime Minister is a KC. The natural instinct of a lawyer is to interrogate. The training of a lawyer is to equip them to interrogate. And yet this House is being told that when the Prime Minister stood at that dispatch box and said, I have confidence in Lord Mandelson, though he knew that questions were being asked, he didn't interrogate and himself ask, about what? When he was told that he knew there were media inquiries about emails, if we're to believe this, he didn't ask, what emails? What do they say?
Would he give way?
Yes.
The Honourable Member is making a fantastic speech, and the Prime Minister said he had confidence in. He didn't say pending investigation or a suspension or I'll look into it or I'll follow process. He said, I had confidence. Why does my honourable friend think that he didn't say, I will look into these situations seriously, and said I had confidence specifically at the dispatch box?
I think that is the most troubling thing about this. That equipped with the knowledge that he inevitably had, Monday night's publications, knowledge that questions were being asked, knowledge that there were media inquiries about the emails, and yet the credibility of this House is to be stretched to be asked to believe that he, a trained lawyer, never interrogated any of that, never asked, what emails? What do they say? What questions have we asked? He came to this House blind, we are asked to believe, to all of that. Now, not only in the appointment of Lord Mandelson do we see serious flaw in the judgment of the Prime Minister, but if that is truly the situation, that he came to this House with a limited but uninterrogated knowledge of these matters, then it raises further questions about the Prime Minister's judgment on all this. And I fear this House has many answers yet to receive. It's a matter of regret to me as it is to others the Prime Minister is not here today to answer those demanding and alarming and yet simple questions. Questions that go to the very heart of not or the Prime Minister's confidence in Lord Mandelson, but to the very heart of whether this House and this people can have confidence in the Prime Minister.
Richard Ford.
Madam Deputy Speaker, the UK has a proud tradition of appointing career civil servants as ambassadors. Our senior diplomatic service is respected worldwide, and travelling with the Foreign Affairs Committee this year, we have heard high praise for our, quote, Rolls-Royce civil service. Professional, reliable, globally respected. And one strength of the British civil service lies in the clear separation between politicians and officials. Since the Northcote and Trevelyan Report of 1854, civil service impartiality has been a sine qua non of a permanent civil service. The reputation of the British government depends on it. That rigid distinction has served us well across the decades and applies in the staffing of our most senior diplomatic posts. And yes, there have been occasional exceptions. Baron Llewellyn of Steep was one, the former Chief of Staff of Baron Cameron of Chipping Norton when he was Prime Minister. He was appointed first as Ambassador to France in 2016 and now serves as His Majesty's Ambassador to Italy. He had gained experience with Baron Chris Patton in Hong Kong and later Lord Ashdown, Paddy Ashdown, when he was High Representative in Bosnia. So plainly, somebody with enormous international experience. But crucially, this political appointment of Baron Llewellyn gave evidence. He was called to the Foreign Affairs Committee in 2017 to give evidence shortly after he had been appointed. Contrast that, the British way, with how the United States makes its ambassadorial appointments. It is common for American presidents to reward political donors or political allies with ambassadorial posts. Donald Trump's choice for the EU ambassador to London is a case in point. The ambassador to London is an investment banker, a donor to the Republican Party, and not a career diplomat. As of the 3rd of September, Donald Trump had appointed 67 ambassadors in his second term. 61 of them are political appointees, more than 90%. Yet in the United States, such appointments are subject to public scrutiny. Every US ambassador must first appear before the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, submitting detailed disclosures on their background, their finances, and their potential conflicts of interest before facing direct questions in a public hearing. In the United States, only after this confirmation hearing does the nomination proceed to the full Senate, where a confirmation vote is required. It ensures a level of transparency and accountability that is absent from the US, from this system here in the UK. Our system is set up for the appointment of senior civil servants who receive vetting on a rolling basis. The Foreign Affairs Committee was not afforded the opportunity to question Lord Mandelson, either in public, before his appointment, or subsequently. We saw this with this appointment of Lord Mandelson, neither the professionalism of the appointment of a British civil servant, nor the scrutiny associated with the political appointees in the US system. We should also look hard at what has happened in US-UK relations since Lord Mandelson took up his post in December. On Ukraine, Lord Mandelson's line was closer to the US than the UK, arguably, prior to his appointment as ambassador. He spoke frivolously on the Koonsberg programme about whatever happens on the fringes of Ukrainian territory. That was not the British government's position. After being appointed in March this year, Mandelson said that President Zelensky should be, quote, more supportive of US peace efforts. These remarks were so out of step that ministers were forced to clarify these comments did not reflect British government policy. On the Middle East, we know that the UK and US governments have taken different approaches to the conflict, and it leaves us wondering in what circumstances the UK position has not been portrayed correctly in Washington, DC. Trade is another area of concern. On the 1st of April this year, I gave the first reading of the US-UK trade agreement, the 10-minute rule bill, arguing for stronger parliamentary scrutiny of any trade deal. And while parliamentary scrutiny of any transatlantic partnership with the United States is essential, so too it is with appointments to the role of ambassador. My instinct is that the UK ambassador to the US should be a professional British civil servant or an official.
On that point?
I will.
I thank the honourable member.
Does he not agree? I mean, he's made the theoretical argument, the general argument, but the actual argument that Karen Pierce was a brilliant ambassador, would never have made the mistakes he alludes to that Lord Mandelson made, and should not have been replaced.
I agree with the right honourable gentleman wholeheartedly and commend him for calling this debate in the first place. He's right. It was rumoured that Karen Pierce wanted to stay in, or at least was willing to stay on in post for another year, and she would have represented us in an excellent manner that we know was characteristic of her. The Prime Minister has extensive powers to appoint senior officials. Usually, the Civil Service Commissioners lead this process to ensure that the selection is on the basis of merit. The Constitutional Reform and Governance Act, or CRAG, allows the Prime Minister to bypass that check on his power. And in this case, it has had disastrous consequences. Madam Deputy Speaker, as I conclude, I have two questions for the Minister. One, will the Government commit that in future, any political appointment to a senior diplomatic role will go before the Foreign Affairs Committee for scrutiny before the appointment is confirmed? And two, will the Government amend Clause 10.3 of the CRAG to ensure that diplomats, like senior civil servants, are appointed on the basis of merit and on the basis of fair and open competition? Thank you.
Lincoln Job.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I would like to thank and congratulate the member for Goole and Pocklington for securing this emergency debate. The focus of the debate thus far has primarily been in three areas: the victims of Jeffrey Epstein's appalling crimes, the conduct of Lord Mandelson prior to him being appointed, and then the judgment of the Prime Minister in both appointing and then firing Lord Mandelson as the British ambassador to Washington. And quite rightly, the House in this debate has focused on those three areas. But I want to add a fourth, which I personally find as chilling as the other three. It is this: that since December last year, our ambassador in Washington has been potentially subject to leverage and blackmail. Because someone, and we don't know who, had politically fatal compromat on Lord Mandelson throughout his whole time in office. And I'm amazed that the Foreign Office has not gone into full lockdown and damage limitation mode, having found out that potentially Lord Mandelson could have been being blackmailed this entire time. And if it had turned out that he had been an agent of a foreign state, they would have done that. All they do know now is that someone had, and we don't know who, politically fatal compromat on him that whole time. So I don't know if the Minister is aware, and the member for Honiton did talk about some of the behaviours of Lord Mandelson in office, and that's the bit I'm concerned about. I don't know if he's aware that Sir Ben Wallace gave an interview to Times Radio recently, in which he said that Lord Mandelson had been lobbying Number 10 Downing Street on behalf of a single defence manufacturer for Britain to buy an unmanned military set of equipment, a major buy, without a competition, bypassing UK SMEs and expertise. Now, I'm not going to put two and two together, but it does seem extraordinary to me that someone who is meant to be promoting British interests overseas is instead promoting US defence capability to Number 10. Now, don't get me wrong, we buy a lot of good kit from America, but it is the absence of a competition which ensures that that skews the pitch and is odd behaviour. And so I would hope that when the Minister gets an opportunity to speak, he will talk about what measures the Number 10 and the Foreign Office are taking to examine every single thing that Lord Mandelson did when our ambassador, in order to establish the extent to which the politically fatal compromat had skewed his judgment and driven his behaviours. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker.
Final backbench contribution, Ben Obsijekti.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The now former UK ambassador to the United States has been sacked due to the nature of his relationship with a convicted paedophile. A relationship that has come as no surprise to anybody, except it would appear the Prime Minister. The Prime Minister knew of Lord Mandelson's relationship with Epstein, the former Foreign Secretary too, and yet his appointment was felt to be worth the risk. Even despite warnings from President Trump's co-campaign manager, Chris Lecivita, who criticised the replacement of the former ambassador, Dame Karen Pierce, as replacing a professional, universally respected AMBO with an absolute moron. Even the Foreign Affairs Select Committee chair, effusive in her praise for Lord Mandelson, asked for him to come before her committee to allow my colleagues to hear directly why the Prime Minister had appointed him. With her face pressed up against the cabinet room window like Tiny Tim out in the cold, I'm surprised she could be heard. But the Minister for the Overseas Territories, looking sheepish in his place on the front bench, was emphatic. We are absolutely convinced that Lord Mandelson will do an excellent job as our representative in Washington, he stated. And yet that whole time, the government was aware of the security warnings that Lord Mandelson's relationship with Jeffrey Epstein crossed the line of what is acceptable and failed to meet the standard expected of what is arguably our most critical ambassadorial appointment. The President of the United States arrives for his second state visit tomorrow, yet we now suffer the embarrassment and indignity of having had to sack our ambassador for his proximity to a man found guilty of soliciting prostitution from a child, whose girlfriend was convicted in 2021 of sex trafficking, conspiracy and transportation of a minor for illegal sexual activity. Indeed, an aspect of this that remains unclear is the nature of Lord Mandelson's relationship with Ghislaine Maxwell. The New York Times has described it as a stinging embarrassment that casts a shadow over the planned state visit. How has the Prime Minister allowed this to happen, ignoring the advice from his security assessment to appoint him anyway, embracing the risk, then having it blow up in his face? Prior to entering Parliament, I worked for Barclays Bank, and in 2021, the bank's CEO, Jess Staley, resigned amid a regulatory probe into whether he mischaracterised his relationship with Jeffrey Epstein. I actually raised a complaint with my managers that was roundly ignored, never advancing beyond managing director level, such was the squeamishness that surrounded the story. I was furious that Barclays still paid Staley his £2.4 million salary and £120,000 pension contribution whilst being defenestrated for his relationship with Epstein. This isn't privileged information, it was widely reported. And yet, whilst the financial world saw fit to wash its hands of Staley, this Labour government welcomed Lord Mandelson with open arms. Those linked to Jeffrey Epstein, who had maintained a relationship with him after his conviction, had visited his island many times where the crimes took place, had long since been deplatformed, deemed too toxic to hold positions of power, and yet the hubris of the Prime Minister saw him ride roughshod over such glaringly obvious concerns. Being the Prime Minister is to take the mantle of the UK's decision-maker-in-chief, to own the responsibility of making not just difficult decisions, but the most difficult decisions. Appointing an ambassador to the United States is not the political banana skin that should bring down the government, and yet here we are. The government is teetering on the brink. Yesterday, the Prime Minister gingerly began climbing down over his handling of the Mandelson sacking. When he came to the chamber last Wednesday, he robustly defended Lord Mandelson, playing to the baying crowd. He even had the chutzpah to claim that the Conservative Party has a leadership contest going on. Interesting to see him in the smoking room last night between votes, wasn't it? Last Wednesday, the Prime Minister stated that full due process was followed during this appointment. He said it twice. If that is true, then the Prime Minister knew the full scope of Mandelson's relationship with Jeffrey Epstein. If he didn't know, and new information subsequently came to light, then either the vetting standards of the government are incompetent, or the claim of full due process is inaccurate. I have confidence in the ambassador. He said that twice too. The Prime Minister's explanation yesterday stated that there were 3 reasons for his tergiversation. The nature and extent of the relationship being far different to what I'd understood the position at that point of appointment. The questioning and challenging of the conviction, which, as I say, goes to the heart of and cuts across what this government is doing on violence against women and girls, and the unsatisfactory nature of the responses from Peter Mandelson last week to the inquiries made of him by government officials, I took the decision to remove him. So can the government lay out precisely what the full due process that was followed? The Prime Minister claims he didn't learn the content of the Bloomberg emails until after his robust defence at PMQs. So, did Lord Mandelson fail to disclose this information during his vetting interview? Was there even a vetting interview? Or did Lord Mandelson disclose everything and the Prime Minister is displaying willful ignorance? I will give way.
Grateful to the Honourable Gentleman for giving way. His speech reminds me of an earlier episode in UK-US relations when Donald Rumsfeld referred to known knowns, unknown unknowns and known unknowns, and whilst the government might be forgiven for not holding Peter Mandelson to account for those unknown unknowns, does he not agree with me that it's unforgivable that they have traded and staked Britain's diplomatic relationship with the US on known unknowns?
With the honourable member, and I think it's incredible that such lax vetting has taken place from this government with regards to what is such an obvious conflict of interest. The nature and extent of the relationship. We knew about Mandelson's closeness to Jeffrey Epstein when the notorious birthday book was published, where Lord Mandelson described the convicted paedophile as his best pal and signed off his many pages of unctuous praise with the line, "Yum yum." What else did the Prime Minister learn beyond that? He claims he only knew of his association. That would appear to be questionable. The questioning and challenging of the conviction. Was Lord Mandelson asked about his opinion of the conviction of his best pal during his vetting interview? Did he disclose that he felt or had ever felt that the conviction was unjustified? Either he wasn't asked, incompetent vetting, he didn't disclose, not a suitable appointment, or he did disclose and it was ignored by the Prime Minister. Exactly. Which is it?
Yep, very good.
The unsatisfactory nature of the responses, the only aspect in the investigation we are yet to learn. The Prime Minister must publish this new information so that this House can fully understand if his answers are unsatisfying now but not before. That would suggest that full due process was not followed in contradiction to what the Prime Minister claimed last week. This whole sorry episode looks set to derail the visit of the President of the United States tomorrow. We are a long way from the chummy bonhomie of the Prime Minister feeling he'd stuck the landing when his perfectly stage-managed hand delivery of the invitation letter to President Trump. I wonder how he's going to explain this all to the President tomorrow. The Prime Minister knows his days are numbered. The new shadow cabinet know his days are numbered. The backbenchers know his days are numbered. Perhaps the Prime Minister should try talking to them on a regular basis and not just greasing up to them in the smoking room when he needs their support. If the Prime Minister cannot exercise the judgment required of the office, then he must resign.
That is the end of the backbench contributions. Colleagues who have spoken should be making their way back to the chamber. I call the Minister, Minister Doughty.
Well, thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And on Thursday, I came to this House to announce that the Prime Minister had asked the Foreign Secretary to withdraw Lord Mandelson as the UK's ambassador to the United States. And can I, at the outset, Madam Deputy Speaker, just say that I know, and there were many comments to this effect from across the House, know that all of us are appalled by Epstein's crimes and all of those who have suffered as a result. And I think they need to be at the forefront of our minds today. And I also want to thank Madam Deputy Speaker, the genuine, I think, suggestions that were made by a number of honourable and right honourable members about scrutiny of processes in relation to, I can say, Madam Deputy Speaker, that the government have listened to particularly the Chair of the Foreign Affairs Committee on this matter, and we will consider all options to support the committee in their work in the future. The Prime Minister took this decision, Madam Deputy Speaker, after new information. I'm not going to give away at the first. I really do think I need to respond to many of the points that have been made in the debate, and then I'll happily take some interventions. The Prime Minister took this decision after new information showed the nature and extent of Lord Mandelson's relationship with Jeffrey Epstein was materially different from what was known at the time of his appointment. And in particular, Madam Deputy Speaker, Lord Mandelson suggested that Epstein's conviction was wrongful, encouraged him to fight for early release, and said that he had been through years of torture. We know the only people tortured, Madam Deputy Speaker, were the women and girls whose lives were destroyed by Epstein's heinous crimes, and I do want to associate myself with the remarks that were made by a number of honourable and right honourable members on that point, both about the crimes and the victims. Madam Deputy Speaker, the Prime Minister has been... I will give way on that very specific point.
Grateful to the Minister for giving way. So is he effectively telling the House that on the basis that Lord Mandelson had retained friendship with Jeffrey Epstein, despite him being a paedophile, that was fine? The only problem was that he thought that Jeffrey Epstein was innocent. So if he had said to the Prime Minister, or hadn't sent those emails, and had said that Jeffrey Epstein was guilty, this wouldn't have been a problem. Is that the message he's conveying to the public?
the Prime Minister has been explicitly clear that the new information is and was not compatible with the duty that we owed the victims of Jeffrey Epstein's horrendous crimes against women and girls, and with this government's clear commitment to tackling that kind of violence and abuse. And as such, Madam Deputy Speaker, the Prime Minister took decisive action to withdraw Lord Mandelson as ambassador. And he has also been clear, and he undertook a number of media interviews yesterday, that Lord Mandelson would not have been appointed if all the information we now have was available at the time. And I point you, I'll just complete this reference, then I will give way. I point you to the reference, Madam Deputy Speaker, to what the Prime Minister had to say yesterday, and I quote, he said, "Had I known then what I know now, then I'd never have appointed him." So following Lord Mandelson's departure and in line with standard diplomatic practice, the Deputy Head of Mission, James Roscoe, an experienced and capable diplomat, has been put in place as the Chargé d'Affaires. I will give way to you.
One simple question to the Minister, because he's doing a fair job, is why is he here and not the Prime Minister answering those questions? Because he clearly can't answer them, and that's no disrespect for him. The Prime Minister said he didn't know something, now he knows something. Could I ask, where is the Prime Minister and why is he not at the dispatch box?
Madam Deputy Speaker, I'm here responding for the Government. I'm the Minister for North America, and he will also understand that there are very important matters taking place today that the Prime Minister and Foreign Secretary are involved with, and of course we've seen the launch of the new Hillsborough Law today as well, which was referenced during the debate. But Madam Deputy Speaker, I do want to say, I will give way to the Honourable Gentleman in short order, but I do want to just say something about our excellent diplomats and officials across the world, because Madam Deputy Speaker, we have an excellent team at the British Embassy in Washington. Indeed, we've had many excellent former ambassadors, and we have a wide network in the United States, across the United States, not just in Washington, and in King Charles Street. And I want to pay particular tribute to them and all the work that they're doing, particularly in supporting the outcomes of this week's important and historic state visits. And I totally associate myself with the remarks made by my honourable friend from Vauxhall and Camberwell Green on their professionalism. And I know that's been experienced by many members across the House, and I think that's important that we have that on the record, Madam Deputy Speaker. This is a crucial moment for UK-US relations, and together we are focused on delivering on jobs, on growth and security for people on both sides of the Atlantic. I said I would give way.
I'm very grateful to the Minister, and because he is such a decent Minister and because he does enjoy respect on both sides of the House, I'm tempted to repeat the advice that Lloyd George gave to Churchill during the Norway debate of 1940, which is not to make himself an air raid shelter to protect his colleagues, in this case the Prime Minister, from the splinters. And if, in fact, the Prime Minister's case is as strong as he makes out, can he explain why, if I remember correctly, only a single backbencher made a speech from his own backbenches in the Prime Minister's favour?
With respect, this was an emergency debate, obviously, Madam Deputy Speaker, that was secured by the opposition. I am here setting out the case very, very clearly, and we've had a number of contributions on this side of the House, but he knows I have affection for him as well across the House and the work that he does, and included his role chairing many important committees in this House before. Madam Deputy Speaker, many honourable and right honourable members have asked a number of specific questions, including about vetting process and security clearances that applied in this particular case, and I fully understand the interest in doing so, and undoubtedly other questions will be raised in the course of discussions in this place. And Madam Deputy Speaker, as you will know, including precedents from the last government, it is the practice of successive administrations not to comment on which officials have access to confidential information, and that remains the case today. And I do want to pay some particular attention to this, Madam Deputy Speaker, because this is important, and there have been very sensible questions raised by members here. The national security vetting process is confidential, and the UK government's vetting charter includes an undertaking to protect personal data and other information in the strictest confidence, and I am not therefore going to depart from that approach here today and release personal information about an individual's confidential vetting. However, while I will not talk about the confidential details relating to this case, I can provide details of the overall processes that were asked about by a number of people, including the right honourable gentleman who initiated the debate. Prior to the announcement of Lord Mandelson's appointment as Ambassador, the Propriety and Ethics team in the Cabinet Office undertook a due diligence process, and after Lord Mandelson's appointment was announced on the 20th of December 2024, the FCDO started the ambassadorial appointment process, including national security vetting. That vetting process was undertaken by UK Security Vetting on behalf of the FCDO and concluded with clearance being granted by the FCDO in advance of Lord Mandelson taking up his post in February. I will give way to him.
Grateful to the honourable gentleman and accepting that private data cannot be disclosed. But I wonder whether there was a mechanism that he could ask the ISC whether they would look into if somebody had been known to have had a close association with a convicted paedophile and they were a civil servant, etc., would they have passed the vetting process to have such a sensitive position? That could be something he passes on to the ISC to look at, because this goes to the heart of the situation. I very much doubt, Madam Deputy Speaker, that people with that sort of association would be given the highest security clearance.
Speaker, I know the honourable gentleman makes that point with sincerity, but I am not going to comment on the national security vetting process. It wouldn't be appropriate. It's been consistent from government to government. And Madam Deputy Speaker, I'm not going to give away. The honourable gentleman was not here in the debate, and he's popped up now trying to intervene on me. Madam Deputy Speaker, national security vetting is a long-standing formal process undertaken by UK security vetting on behalf of individual departments and reporting back to them. National security vetting helps departments to identify and manage risks where individuals have access to sensitive assets or sites, and there are established processes, Madam Deputy Speaker, within national security vetting to consider any security concerns raised and manage such risks appropriately. And this is very important, Madam Deputy Speaker. The national security vetting process is rightfully independent of ministers who are not informed of any findings other than the final outcome. Exactly the same procedures on that were followed in this case. I will make a little bit more progress and then I'll happily give way. As I said at the start, Madam Deputy Speaker, but returning to the fundamental question that has been asked by many honourable and right honourable members, in light of the new information, the Prime Minister made the decision to withdraw Lord Mandelson as ambassador. The Prime Minister took decisive action on these issues, and now the government's focus is seizing the opportunities of our US partnership as we look forward to the next phase of government moving from fixing the foundations to driving forward growth and national renewal. And a lot of honourable and right honourable members asked very sensible questions about the relationship with the United States, our economy, our security, the state visit that is happening this week. And I would point the House, Madam Deputy Speaker, to the fact that last week we secured and announced a £400 million contract with Google Clouds, boosting secure communications between the UK and US and building new intelligence capabilities for the UK Armed Forces. On Sunday, Madam Deputy Speaker, we announced over £1.2 billion of private US investment in the UK's world-leading financial services sector, and that new investment is going to create 1,800 new jobs across the UK and boost benefits for millions of customers. And just yesterday, Madam Deputy Speaker, we announced a new UK-US partnership on civil nuclear power as part of our drive to put billions of pounds of private investment into clean energy, and I look forward to further announcements over the coming days.
Order! I can barely hear the Minister.
Well, thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I have, Madam Deputy Speaker, I think I've taken a number of interventions, and I do want to make some points and make some progress here. Honourable and right honourable members asked about the US-UK relationship. I can tell them that it's strong, it's thriving and it's growing, Madam Deputy Speaker. These steps are going to make sure that our two nations continue to lead the world in innovation. We have trade worth over $315 billion last year, and the US and UK economies are inextricably linked. And through the state visit, we will take that relationship even further, making trade and investment deals that will benefit hard-working families across these countries and regions. I will happily give way.
I'm most grateful to the Minister giving way. Last week, the Prime Minister expressed confidence in Lord Mandelson. This week, does this Minister express his confidence in national security vetting?
Madam Deputy Speaker, of course I have confidence in our national security vetting staff. They do incredibly important work keeping this country safe, and I am not going to comment on individual cases. I've been very, very clear about that. But can I return to the fundamental question that he and others asked, Madam Deputy Speaker? I will happily give way to the Chair of the Committee.
I wondered if the honourable gentleman might help us with this. In the letter that the new Foreign Secretary wrote to me, she told us that the proprietary and ethics team in the Cabinet Office conducted a due diligence process prior to the announcement of the appointment at the request of number 10. The FCDO was not asked to contribute to that process, and no issues were raised with the FCDO as a result of that process. Is the honourable gentleman, now that he's heard that, was he surprised that the Foreign Office were not involved in that?
Madam Deputy Speaker, I've set out the process very clearly, and I know the Chair has had that letter. It does set it out very clearly in the letter, and she may have missed just slightly at the start of the debate the commitment I made to her and indeed members of her committee about considering all options to support the committee in their work in the future in relation to pre-scrutiny processes. I think it was a very important and sensible point that she made. Madam Deputy Speaker, I'm going to conclude because I do want to get back to the fundamental question here, Madam Deputy Speaker, which is that the Prime Minister has made clear that Lord Mandelson should not and would not have been appointed as ambassador in light of the shocking information that came to light in the past week. And the argument, Madam Deputy Speaker, that we've heard today from members opposite is that this was clear all along. But, Madam Deputy Speaker, if the full depth and extent of this relationship had been so obvious, I hardly think that Lord Mandelson would have been one of the leading candidates to become Chancellor of Oxford University. But he was, and Madam Deputy Speaker, I highly doubt that he would have been offered a job as presenter on Times Radio, but he was. And Madam Deputy Speaker, when he appeared on BBC Newsnight, Madam Deputy Speaker, a programme that's done very important work investigating the crimes of...
Order. Is it really a point of order?
It is a point of order.
Point of order, Desmond Sway.
Am I mistaken in my belief that there is a convention in the House that when the Leader of the Opposition puts her hand on the dispatch box and seeks to intervene, the Minister gives way?
This is not a matter for the Chair, and it's entirely up to the Minister if he wishes to give way or not. Minister Doughty.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I was making an important point about the scrutiny that BBC Newsnight had done on Jeffrey Epstein, and I'd expected such serious questions would have been asked of him, but to my recollection, none were. And indeed, I'm glad that the Leader of the Opposition wants to intervene on me, because I have a question for her. She and the Shadow Foreign Secretary, indeed other people who've been speaking on the other side, have regularly raised questions today, but I would ask them, did they raise a word in this House about Lord Mandelson's appointment before last Wednesday? Because I don't have any records of that. And in fact, actually, the record shows that they didn't raise that. They didn't raise questions. And the reality is that in light of new information, the Prime Minister has acted decisively. I will give way.
Madam Deputy Speaker, we didn't need any new information to know that this was an unsuitable appointment. And the Minister is, making a doughty defence of Lord Mandelson. The truth is, this debate has been about the Prime Minister's judgment. When I was a Secretary of State and questions were asked about judgment, I didn't send junior ministers to answer my questions. I faced the House and I explained what had happened. The Prime Minister is not doing so. So will he now commit to answering all the questions which I asked in writing? And also, will he take this opportunity to apologise to the victims? He has not done so. The government has not done so. The debate is nearly over. Will he take this opportunity to apologise to the victims for the appointment of Lord Mandelson?
Well, Madam Speaker, perhaps the Leader of the Opposition wasn't in her seat at the start of the debate, because I made very clear our position on Epstein's victims and our horror at the revelations and all of our thoughts to be with them. And I made that point in sincerity in response to the points that have been made across this House. And I say it again, Madam Deputy Speaker, but she couldn't answer the question. She didn't raise this issue before last Wednesday. And if it was also obvious, why didn't she do that? So,
Order. I hope it's a proper point of order. Dr. Luke Evans, point of order.
Mr. Speaker, I raised myself an example during the debate, so I'd hate for the ministers to mislead the House inadvertently, using the example of the Sky News and the member for Melton, who talked about exactly this, raising concerns about Mr. Mandelson. So even in the debate, we had evidence of what this side had been doing back in May, talking about the inappropriateness of this ambassador.
Heard enough. That is not a point of order. Minister Doughty.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I was referencing whether this had been raised in this House by the Leader of the Opposition and others. Madam Deputy Speaker, the Prime Minister has acted decisively in response to this new information, which is exactly what should have happened. The former ambassador has been withdrawn. The Prime Minister and this government are focused on deepening our special relationship with the United States in the interests of people across the Atlantic, for jobs, for growth, for prosperity, for security, for our defence. And that relationship with the United States, Madam Deputy Speaker, is a relationship that has endured, is enduring and will endure for the prosperity and security of our peoples well into the future. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker.
I come to David Davis to wind up. David.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'm going to pause for a second. Firstly, I'll say to the Minister, I think everybody who spoke in the House, everybody, remembered the victims. Yeah. And after the sound of this political gunfire is long forgotten, they will still be suffering the scarring of what happened to them as a result of Mr. Epstein's behaviour. And I would say to him that without U-turns or whatever, he should say to his Prime Minister that the next possible opportunity at that dispatch box, he should apologise to those victims for what the government has done to date. Right? So that's the first thing I'll say to him. The second thing is, he is, of course, highly respected in this House. Yes. I see him there almost as sort of the last Spartan at Thermopylae, full of arrows as he stands there trying to defend an impossible position. And that's, it's a position a number of us have been in ourselves, so I have some sympathy for it. But the simple truth is, I found it really hard to reconcile what he said about this clearance process with what I know was known by the agencies as long ago as 2008 about Mandelson's behaviour, connections and the like. And the possibility, one of my honourable friends talked about compromat, the clear possibility of compromat. So I find it very difficult to reconcile that with what he said. And all I can say to him is that there seem to be two possibilities. One is that, as often happens with direct vetting, that the agencies produce to the Minister a series of risks, and the Minister, in this case the Prime Minister I assume, decides those risks are worth taking. So that's one possibility. The other possibility is that the vetting process was completely broken, and somehow or other it did not detect all of these things that were in plain sight. And that strikes to me as implausible. So I'm afraid what he's told the House doesn't seem to figure, particularly when it's added to the Chairman of the Select Committee's comments about the Propriety and Ethics Team's report being produced effectively without the FCDO's input, which again is absolutely astonishing. Now, the House itself has been remarkably unanimous, I think with one exception, he's sitting over there. The Leader of the Opposition made her characteristically sharply focused speech, and she said something, a number of things which almost uniquely the leader of every other party here agreed with, which is that we need the information, we need the accountability. And what does that mean? What does that mean? My honourable friend, the member for Aldridge Brownhills, really highlighted we need to release all the documents, and not to hide behind security. There is no security issue here in terms of the national interest. The issue is this system working? And we cannot know unless we see those documents. We need the ministers involved and the advisers involved to appear before the relevant select committees and answer questions on this matter. And frankly, if he wants to hide behind security, they can even do that in camera, so long as it's done properly and that they have the opportunity to test some of these assertions. And he and others got a good deal of good advice from a number of people, most notably the father of the House, but others too, when they said that these problems are bad enough when they're in the original era, but they get worse in the cover-up. Yeah. They get worse if you don't actually admit what's happened. And so honesty is not just important in this, it's also a survival characteristic for the ministers involved. So I have to say to him today that he, as I said, he's the last Spartan of Thermopylae. He's not been sent here with the weapons to deal with this. He's not been sent here with the answers to the questions that we all properly have. And so I'm going to finish as I started, by reminding him about that bill that they announced today.
Yes.
You know, the first words of it say, or the first words of on the order paper say, a bill to impose a duty on public authorities and public officials to act with candour, transparency and frankness, to make provision for the enforcement of that duty in their dealings with inquiries and investigations, and to require public authorities to promote and take steps to maintain ethical conduct within all parts of the authority. Well, that's what we expect. And frankly, if we don't get the answers, and by the sounds of it we're not going to get the answers, we will return to this matter. I suspect the entire opposition will return to the matter. I suspect some opposition within his own party will return to the matter. And when he eventually passes that bill, I guarantee I'll be seeking to make sure that ministers are covered by it too, not just... And then, next year, look what happens. Thank you.
The question is as on the order paper. As many as that opinion say aye. Aye. The contrary no. The ayes have it. The ayes have it. I'll give the front benches a few moments to swap over as we prepare for the 10-minute rule motion. Colleagues need to leave quietly and quickly.
Is there an
Miss Gilmore, Miss Gilmore, Miss Stauberry, this is not the time or the place. We come to the 10-minute rule motion, child poverty strategy, removal of the 2-child limit, and I call Kirsty Blackman.
Much, Madam Deputy Speaker. For too long, children have been left behind, and no decisive action has been taken to address the root causes of poverty. This is completely unacceptable. No child should be left hungry, cold, or have their future held back.